touch of me, hoping light comes through. Baby, hold me like a night sky holds a mood. Silly colors rushing me, and some I can't undo. I hold my tongue to add the things I can't deny. I've been cutting out these things in me to make me feel alright. I've tried all these things, just don't feel right. Baby, it's all for feeling like back tomorrow. It's why I've been dimming down my sides. Baby, it's all for feeling like back tomorrow. Playing the wrong game is the first mistake I made. Faking hard, but way too young to face the world this way. All I know is that my heart lay on my sleeve. I ain't too good at blending in, my face too hard to bleach. Keeping up like I should act right and get it right with every side. I can't leave, it makes me weak. Oh, I've tried all these things, just don't feel right. Baby, it's all for feeling like my tomorrow. It's why I've been dimming down my sides. Baby, it's all for feeling like my tomorrow. I've tried all these things, just don't feel right. Baby, it's all for feeling like my tomorrow. It's why I've been dimming down my sides. Baby, it's all for feeling like my tomorrow.
Mic check 2, mic check 2. Do you hear us out there? Mic check 2, mic check 2. Mic check 1, mic check 1, mic check 1. Let us know if you hear us out there. Mic check 1. Both mics checked. Both mics checked.
Yeah. I don't do what you do. You do. I don't do what you do. You do. I don't do what you do. You do. I don't do what you do. Been a long time since it felt so good. I'm overlooked, you just misunderstood. Like a clock, bet I put in the work. Excuses be lame, you just be missing them perks. Tighten up the work. Flexing while I'm fixing the quirks. If I don't give my all, when I'm done it hurts. I don't do what you do. I don't do what you do. I don't do, yeah, what you do. I don't do what you do. Why you don't do what you do. God, oh, I pray, give me a day, give me a reason, give me a time, give me a second. I wanna find, give me a clue, give me some wings, help me to fly, help me to see. I need a solution, try to get by. Want what I want, so I need and I try. Cause I don't do what you do. 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 I don't
disaster. You can't run no faster, taste and see.
Good evening, Bourbon Women, and welcome to the Sip Summer Series. I'm Peggy No Stevens, the founder of Bourbon Women, and I have to tell you, last night was just sensational, and we have an even better night tonight. You won't believe what we have lined up for you, but I hope by now you have poured yourself a glass, maybe even sitting with a few friends and comfortable. And I'll tell you, I've got story after story to tell, and we have so much to say, but we're going to start with a little story about how we even founded the Bourbon Women Association. And so it's so appropriate tonight that I'm in Minnick Media Studio, and my good friend Fred Minnick is streaming for us tonight. And so, Fred, I can't believe it, but it's been 9 years since I inaugurated Bourbon Women at the Kentucky Governor's Mansion, and you were there as a journalist. I mean, can you believe it's been 9 years? We'll be celebrating 10 years next year.
Unbelievable that it's been that long, and just to think about like the friendships we've made in that amount of time, and all the the bourbon growth, and just all the incredible women who've come to the scene through Bourbon Women. It's just amazing. It's almost been a decade.
Well, I'll tell you, and I never in a million years thought that we would be in so many different branches across the United States. And I think we've executed well over 200 events. Sadly, we couldn't do our symposium in person, but this is definitely the next best thing. And I don't think people really know this, Fred, but this actual book, Whiskey Women, you were inspired by that night when we first started the Bourbon Women Association to write the book about how women have been involved in the industry for over 200 years, but we just didn't get credit for it. So I always like to say that Bourbon Women is not a cute little drinking club. It's a movement. And we're delighted to have you here. And Fred, I love being in your studio because you have so many whiskeys to choose from. So I have to tell you, I stole some.
Yes, you did.
I did, and I'm not telling anybody what I'm drinking. I'm going to sit it right here on this little barrel coaster so I don't spill it. But in between, I will be sipping. And I'm dying for everybody else to guess what's in my glass, if you could possibly guess. And at this point, I do want to thank the spirits community, because I can't tell you, and Fred, you know this about our industry, when we decided to do this virtual conference, it was something that we really had to tackle and decide, what would entertain you? What would you be delighted to see? But at the same time, all we had to to our friends from podcast influencers, some of the people you see tonight, we asked them if they would be on. It was just a New York minute that they agreed to be on. Fred, Minnick Media, we thank you for live streaming tonight. So with that, with that, I just want to thank our bourbon community that I treasure. So let's hear a little bit now from Kerri Richards, our president.
Good evening, Bourbon Women, and possibly a handful of Bourbon Gents. I'm Kerri Richardson, the president of the Bourbon Women Association, and I am so tickled to be with you for our second night of our Sip Summer Series. I hope the first night for you was engaging, informative, and a little bit fun. I expect that tonight's session will be just as fun. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about how the Sip Summer Series is going so far. So visit us at bourbonwomen.org or on any of our social platforms and let us know what you think. I want to thank our presenting sponsors, Discus and Spirits United, for making this content possible this weekend. In particular, I want to say thanks to all of our sponsors for recognizing that women are a crucial part of the bourbon industry, not just on the consumer side, but also on the distilling and hospitality side. Way to know where your consumers are. And we will thank you a lot, not only on social platforms, but also when we see you in person again in August 2021 for our 10th anniversary. If you're not familiar with bourbonwomen.org, you ought to be. If you visit our website, you'll be familiar with where you can find a local branch, and most importantly, what our mission is. Our Bourbon Women mission is to bring together people who love bourbon culture, women, and the promise of adventure when the two get together. If that sounds like you ought to be a member by now. Visit bourbonwomen.org and learn how to sign up. This is the Sip Summer Series, a 3-day virtual conference full of bourbon cocktails, education, panelists, authors, and more, designed to get you reconnected with your Bourbon Women family and the bourbon that you so dearly love. If this is content that's valuable to you, And it is, right? I mean, you're still watching. Make sure you visit bourbonwomen.org to make a donation. We love doing this for you, but the stuff isn't cheap. Make a small donation so that we can continue to keep content flowing for you until the pandemic is over. We can finally get together and share a cocktail together. Next August 2021 will be our next symposium, assuming that the pandemic has gone away. It is our fervent hope that we will see you in Louisville, Kentucky for that conference and to celebrate an important milestone. Bourbon Women turns 10 next year, and it's been an amazing decade so far. Please make plans now to join us for our 10-year anniversary celebration in Louisville in August 2021. I have 2 programs I want to make sure that you're aware of as you continue on your Bourbon Women journey. The first is the Amber Circle. We had noticed that we had a lot of younger women who were just beginning to make their way in the hospitality or distilling industry. And we have a lot of women that have experience in those worlds. So we decided to bring the 2 together. We have a set of women who have extensive business experience, consumer support, hospitality experience, time, talent, and treasure. And they chose to share that with the younger women who were just coming up into that world. We created the Amber Circle to make sure that we were providing opportunities for mentorship, leadership, and friendship. It's been an extraordinary success, and we're continuing that Amber Circle work as we continue throughout the year. If that sounds like something you want to be a part of, perhaps you have advice to give or a book that you'd like to share, let us know. Visit bourbonwomen.org to figure out how you can connect with Amber Circle. We've developed a diversity and inclusion council designed to do better outreach for women of color, not only in our membership, but also in the distilling industry as a whole. We want to make a difference, and we want to do better. If you can help us in that path, please let us know. Visit bourbonwomen.org to discover how you can connect with us. It is time to get to the content. It's time to figure out how to make your next favorite cocktail or learn more about the next best bourbon book. And I'm getting in the way. So thanks for being here with us. Thanks for supporting our sponsors. And thanks for loving Bourbon Women. It's been an extraordinary journey for the past 9 years. It's an extraordinary time now. And we can't wait till we see you in person again in August 2021, right here in Louisville. May the Lord hasten the day that we are back together. Until then, we'll see you soon, and cheers.
Thank you, Kerri. We appreciate that message from you, and I have to turn our attention to some beautiful booze. Now, I will tell you, I have always thought, booze was beautiful, but this girl, she actually wrote the book titled Beautiful Booze. And I have been stalking this girl on Instagram for probably over a year now, watching her make these just sensational, beautiful cocktails. And so now she's put it all in a book that's going to be launched, I believe, August 25th. And her name is Natalie Miglerini. And she's from Seattle. And I have to tell you, I don't want to steal her thunder because we're going to bring her on shortly. But very quickly, somebody guessed that I was drinking Booker's. Nope. I love me some Booker's. Anybody who knows me well, they know that, but it is not Booker's. Try again, but I will say it's some beautiful booze.
Hi everyone, my name is Natalie Miglerini and I am the founder and creator of Beautiful Booze. If you're not familiar with Beautiful Booze, it's a cocktail website and Instagram account for the home bartender and cocktail enthusiast. I started Beautiful Booze right here in Seattle 7 years ago to really share my passion for mixing up cocktails. I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina, and that's where I really got obsessed with bourbon. When I was in Seattle, I had a surplus of bourbon. I was always drinking it neat. Then I decided I wanted to try some really great bourbon cocktails. So that is where I started Beautiful Booze. So I'm so excited to be here today at the Sip Summer Series to mix up 4 different bourbon cocktails. The first cocktail I will be showing y'all how to make today is from my new book, Beautiful Booze, Stylish Cocktails to Make at Home. My book comes out this month on August 25th. It has 123 recipes and I'm so excited. The next 2 recipes I will be making are more sour-forward cocktails. I love the sour profile. It's very refreshing for the summer. And the last cocktail, which I would like to call the nightcap, is my all-time favorite bourbon cocktail. I'm so excited to show y'all all 4 of these cocktails. Let's get started. As I said before, our first cocktail that we're making comes out of my book from the chapter of Stylish Sours. This cocktail is called Violet is Less Than Impressed. So I'm gonna show you really quick the ingredients. We're gonna do 1.5 ounces of bourbon. I'm using Heaven's Door, but you can use whatever bourbon you really love. We are going to do 1 ounce of fresh lemon juice. And what I tell all of my followers about really upgrading your cocktails at home is using fresh citrus takes your cocktail to the next level, and it is fairly inexpensive. And what I use as a juicer for that works every time is this little citrus press. These things are great investments for the home bar. We're also going to do 1 ounce of homemade blueberry simple syrup. This blueberry syrup is a gorgeous color. It's very seasonal, and it is so easy to make. To make a simple syrup at home, you want to use equal parts sugar and water. And then you can always flavor that syrup. So what I did is I did not actually have fresh blueberries on hand, so I used some frozen ones. So what I did is 1 cup water, 1 cup sugar, and then about 1/2 cup of frozen blueberries. I put that in a medium saucepan until the sugar dissolved, and I let that sit for about 15 minutes so all the blueberries married with that syrup, and then I just strain the blueberries out and we get this gorgeous blueberry syrup. Then we're also going to use an egg white. Now, some people do not like using egg whites, and that's fine. This drink will be great even without the egg whites. I like the mouthfeel that it gives to the drinks, and I actually first thought when I went into a bar that I was very intimidated about making drinks with egg whites at home, but I basically Googled it and I watched a YouTube video, and it's pretty easy to do egg whites at home, and I'm gonna show you how to really get that foam in your cocktail if you're using egg whites. And then we're just gonna garnish with a lemon slice. So let's get started with this first cocktail. For this one, we're going to be shaking it, and because we're using an egg white, I am going to be doing a reverse dry shake, and I will show you what that means in just a second. So let's go ahead and put our 1.5 ounces, 1.5 ounces of our bourbon right into our shaker. There we go, the liquid gold. We're going to do 1 ounce of our fresh lemon juice, which is really going to balance that cocktail out. Okay, here we go, right into our shaker. Then we're going to do 1 ounce of our blueberry syrup. I like the 1 ounce to 1 ounce, 1 ounce of syrup to 1 ounce of citrus. That really gives a balance. Then we're going to go ahead and crack our egg white in here. And hopefully I succeed the first time in doing this. So I just usually crack the egg in half and then just kind of separate the yolk out like I would separate an egg white omelet. And so that's in there. Now we're going to add ice. And I mentioned we are going to do the reverse dry shake, which means we are going to shake this cocktail with ice, strain the ice out, and then shake it without ice. I feel that technique provides the best foam. Some people may have other opinions in that, and that's fine. This is just what works for me. You can do whatever works for you. So let's go ahead and add several handfuls of ice to our shaker. Okay, here we go. We will shake this up. Okay, so now we've shaken it with ice. So we're going to strain that ice out so we can shake it without ice. There. Nice out. Okay, perfect. Now we're going to shake it again. Let's get this going. Now see, we're all done. So that cocktail essentially had 3 ingredients plus the egg white We have shaken it twice and still it was super fast. And I realized right now I need to grab my glass so we can go ahead and serve this. All right, so this is our glass here. Move this up so you guys can see it. And we are just gonna go ahead and strain this into our glass. If you do not like pulp and other things, you can also, this is called double strain, but today I'm just gonna strain it straight into this glass. Now look at this gorgeous blueberry color. I mean, and the foam just keeps rolling out. Okay, there we go. And for our garnish, it's very simple. In the book, I garnish it with a lemon slice like this. And then I also add an edible flower, so you can do that as well. And if you don't want to garnish, you don't have to garnish either, because look how gorgeous this cocktail is without even a garnish. So cheers, let's give it a try. Wow, the blueberry syrup and the bourbon just work so well together. And then all of that citrus lemony balance to it. This is an amazing cocktail, and I hope y'all will make it. Okay, so our next cocktail is called the Gold Rush. Now, I did a twist on the classic Gold Rush. The classic Gold Rush cocktail is only 3 ingredients. It's bourbon, honey syrup, and lemon. But what I've done is I created a lavender honey syrup just to twist it up a little bit and give it some floral notes. So we will be doing bourbon, lemon juice, and of course our lavender honey syrup. Now how I made this is, honey syrup is fairly easy to make, but you can't just squeeze honey or take honey out of the jar and put it into the cocktail, because it'll gloop up and it won't marry with all the ingredients. So what you want to do is equal parts honey with water and just kind of put it on the stove and let the honey melt into the water, and you get a honey syrup. And I've actually used a kettle to do this as well. I just put some honey in a cup with equal parts hot water from a kettle, and I just kind of mixed it, and that also made a honey syrup. But for this one, what I did is 1 cup water, 1 cup honey in a medium saucepan on medium, and let the honey dissolve into the water. And then I added a little bit of lavender just to give it that floral note for a really nice summer twist on the classic Gold Rush. And this syrup smells amazing. So we're gonna get started. This drink we're gonna be shaking here in our shaker. So we're gonna do, what did I say, 2 ounces? Yeah, we're gonna do 2 ounces of bourbon. Again, I'm using this Heaven's Door, but use whatever you like. That's gonna go right into our shaker. Then we're gonna do 1 ounce of our fresh lemon juice, which I juiced previously to this. So we'll go ahead and do that right into our shaker. And then 3/4 ounces of our lavender honey syrup. Just gonna go right in here. So that's our 3 ingredients right there. And you know, if you don't want to do lavender, maybe you hate lavender, maybe you have strawberries on hand or anything, the blueberry simple syrup that we just made, that would also be really great. And you can infuse your honey syrup with strawberries or blueberries or whatever you would like. So we're going to grab a couple handfuls of ice, and we're going to shake this up a little bit. We're not going to overshake it because we are going to serve this cocktail on ice. So we'll go ahead and shake it up. Okay, that's going to be enough for that. And I'm going to show you what I did for the garnish. And you can do anything you want. You don't have to garnish it. I'm serving this in a rocks glass. And what I did is I rubbed a little bit of fresh honey on the rim. And I put some dried lavender right here on the rim like you would do for a margarita. I like the aroma that it gives off when you're drinking the cocktail. So when you're sipping this, you smell all those lavender notes. I'm going to go ahead. I've got a big chunk of clear ice here. Put it right into my rocks glass. And then for this cocktail, I am going to double strain so you guys see what that's like right over my big ice cube. And there you have it. This is our Lavender Gold Rush. Oh my God, just the aromatics coming off of this is amazing. Let's try it. Wow. I think this is like every time I make a Gold Rush cocktail, like I forgot about it for a couple years, but somehow it came back to me during quarantine, and I'm just like, this is my go-to cocktail. It is so delicious. We are now at cocktail number 3. I could not pass up making my favorite version of a bourbon sour. Now, I actually heard about this recipe because my followers, I asked them when I was doing some Instagram lives during quarantine what cocktails they were making, and someone told me that their favorite version of a bourbon sour had a very special ingredient that I'm going to share with you in just a minute, and I knew I had to make that cocktail immediately, and it did not disappoint. So we are, for this bourbon sour recipe, we are going to use 1.5 ounces of bourbon. We are using this Noble Oak, which is a double oak bourbon. It is also finished with sherry staves. Now that is a clue to our next ingredient, which is the special secret ingredient, which is Fino Sherry. I love the notes that this sherry gives to this bourbon sour. I can never go back to how I used to drink my bourbon sours. The sherry has been a game changer for me. We are going to do 3/4 ounces of our fresh lemon juice, and then we are going to use a honey syrup. Again, I have been on this kick with using honey syrups. I love the flavor profile that it gives cocktails versus just a regular simple syrup. If you don't like honey for any of these recipes, you can definitely just use a simple syrup. But I feel like the notes of the bourbon and the sherry go really great with this honey syrup. And then we are going to use a couple dashes of these Angostura aromatic bitters just to balance and season the cocktail. So let's get started with this. We will be shaking this cocktail again, and we are going to do 1.5 ounces of our Noble Oak bourbon. I really love this bottle. It was a great investment. It's super delish. Right into our shaker. Then we're going to do 3/4 ounce of both our honey syrup and our fresh lemon juice. Okay, there's our honey going in, and then also our fresh squeezed lemon juice, 3/4 ounce. Then we're going to do 1/2 ounce of our sherry, and this is Fino. Go 1/2 ounce, just a little bit, and it's a game changer. And then we're going to do some dashes of bitters. And bitters are used just to balance and season our cocktail. There we go. Now we're going to add a couple handfuls of ice and shake this cocktail up. And again, this is a pretty simplistic cocktail. If you wanted to add an egg white to this, you could. That would be great if you wanted to. You can really customize all these recipes. Shake it up. Okay, there we go. Now for this one, we're going to be serving it up. And this is in a coupe glass. You can use any kind of glass you like. This is one of my favorite glasses. It's called the Nick and Nora glass. You can order these. They're very versatile. You can use them from anything from bourbon sours to daiquiris to Manhattans. They are great. And then we are going to go ahead and we'll double strain this one as well. Okay, there we go. And then for this garnish, I just thought we could use a lemon twist. So I bought this, it's like a vegetable peeler at the Dollar Tree. It was literally $1, and I think I've had this for almost 3 years. I was actually surprised it lasts that long. I'm sure you can get better ones, but this has been great. So you're just gonna peel off the skin of the lemon, and then you can twist it up like this. I like to, the ends are pretty rough here, so I'm gonna tidy them up. I've got some kitchen shears. That is my method of getting things done with these garnishes. I love using these scissors, culinary scissors, cocktail scissors. So what you can do is you just hold both ends of the peel. This is a longer one, but you can just twist it like this, and you will notice that when you do that, some of the citrus oils will come out and they're amazing. So what I do is I just go around my glass like that to put some of those citrus oils on the rim, and then I garnish it. And this is my favorite bourbon sour. Let's try it. Oh my God. I am just obsessed with this drink all the way around. The honey goes so great with the bourbon as well as the sherry. Like I said before, this cocktail has really blown my mind. When someone suggested that they added sherry to their bourbon sours, I knew that that was going to be the cocktail for me. So I knew I had to share it with y'all. And so I hope that you make this cocktail because it is so delish. All right, we are now at our fourth and final cocktail. It's what I would like to call the finale, the nightcap. Like I said before, this is one of my all-time favorite cocktails, so I'm excited to share it with you all. Essentially, after making 3 sours, I wanted to show you a more boozy and spirit-forward cocktail. This is 3 ingredients, very easy, equal parts. The recipe is so simple, I don't even have to look at my notes either. So I'm excited to show you this. If you are familiar with the Boulevardier cocktail, this is a very similar cocktail, except we're switching out the sweet vermouth of the Boulevardier with a dry vermouth. So that is the difference, and I absolutely love it. So I will show you how simple this is. All you have to do is, instead of a shaker, we are going to be using a mixing glass. You don't have to have a fancy mixing glass like this. You can just have, you know, a bigger oversized glass in your house, or even the shaker tin that I was using, you can mix that. If you don't have a spoon like this, I've seen people use everything from chopsticks to regular spoons. You just want to use what you have, but let's get started. So equal parts, so easy. 1 ounce of our bourbon, okay, straight in there. Next, we're going to do 1 ounce of Italian red bitter. I'm using this one. Most people know this as Campari, but you can use any Italian red bitter. We're going to do 1 ounce, okay, right in there. And then we're going to do 1 ounce of our dry vermouth. I'm using Vaya, which is a vermouth made in California. It's really, really nice. So how simple was that? You don't even have to shake the cocktail. This is great if you're having friends over because it's super easy to mix. And we're going to go ahead, fill up our mixing glass with several handfuls of ice here. Okay, there we go. And here's our spoon. Just want to stir that around. This is going to help mix the cocktail, cool the cocktail, as well as dilute the cocktail. We will stir this. Show you more of this, how I'm stirring. Let me get my spoon situated right. There we go. Stir, 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 stir. All right, that should be enough stirring, and I realized I forgot my strainer, so 1 second. All right, so you can serve this in whatever glass you want to. You can serve it up or over ice. I'm serving mine up. I'm using this glass that always sits on my shelf that no one uses. It's time for it to be used, and I'm just gonna strain that cocktail right in here. Okay, there we go. Now for the garnish, for this, I love doing an orange citrus peel. So we're gonna use our peeler again and just peel off some orange here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to tidy it up with my kitchen shears quickly. There we go. And so here is our citrus peel. Now what I'm gonna do, because I really want those citrus oils in my glass and across the cocktail. I'm going to express out the oils over my cocktail instead of just rubbing those around the top, which I will do, but I'm going to show you. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the peel and squeeze it between your fingers and then just push. And you will see that citrus oil express all over your cocktail. Then I like to rub the rest of the oils here on the rim of the glass and then just drop that orange peel in for your garnish. Let's try this. I can already smell those beautiful oils coming off. Oh my gosh, this smells amazing. Oh my gosh, this is so good. It's light and refreshing due to the dry vermouth, but it's also spirit forward. It's a great drink to have at happy hour or as a nightcap. Like I said, it's one of my all-time favorite bourbon cocktails. I used to say that about a Boulevardier. Then I discovered this Old Pal. And what can I say? I'm just totally obsessed with this. So cheers. And that comes to the end of my session. Thank you so much for joining me here to learn how to make 4 of my favorite bourbon cocktails. I also just wanted to say again that Beautiful Booze Stylish Cocktails to Make at Home is available for pre-order now. It releases on August 25th. It has over 120 recipes with photos, including the first recipe that I made. Also, you can find out more information and see a link to buy the book on my Instagram, which is at Beautiful Booze. And again, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining me today on my bourbon cocktail journey, and I look forward to answering any questions that you have.
Hi, Natalie, all the way from Seattle. We loved watching that. It was like cocktail alchemy. I mean, that's the only way I can describe it. Now, I know you're having a big storm where you are, so we're really appreciative of you phoning in, and thank goodness you probably have a cocktail in your hand, I'm guessing.
I do. Thank you so much for having me. We have a bit of a windstorm going on here in Seattle, but you know, the weather's a bit temperamental, but yeah, of course, I actually have the drink, Old Pal.
Oh, good.
My favorite bourbon drink in my hand now. So yeah, starting the weekend off right.
Well, listen, we have had questions just kind of flurrying in. So do you mind if I ask you a few while you got the time? We've got Ronnie Moser, who wants to know if your book has several simple syrup recipes.
Yeah, so the book goes through like a very simple syrup recipe, which you will be able to use and kind of modify if you do want to add in like fresh fruit or herbs or spices. There's a strawberry simple syrup recipe in there. So essentially, if you do want to add fruit other than strawberries, you can just use that recipe as a guideline.
I love it. And, you know, that's important to me being in Kentucky, and we've got Derby a couple weeks away. So simple syrups are kind of my thing, you know, with mint juleps. So I will be looking that up. And then Jackie Williamson asked if you have ever used vegan egg white substitutes.
Yes, so you can use something called aquafaba, which is actually the liquid in a chickpea can, which is random, but it will make the same kind of foam. There are some products out there, one called the Miraculous Foamer. It's called Miraculous Foamer from Better Bitters, I believe, Mrs. Better Bitters. They're out of Canada. And that Miraculous Foamer, I like it because I travel all the time. You can carry it around. You just put a couple drops in your egg white, substitute it in for the egg white in your cocktail, and it does miraculously foam. So there are some alternatives. Obviously, the easiest one around the house would be to use that aquafaba is the liquid in the chickpea can.
That's a great tip. And then Millie O'Donnell wanted to know, what is one of your cocktail disaster stories?
Oh, wow. There's been a lot of,
And don't say my ice melted too quickly. That's everybody's disaster, right?
yeah, I mean, that's one of my number one tips, especially for parties. It's like the running out of ice is always like a disaster because you always get so much, but you seem to always run out. I mean, I've had so many disasters just experimenting. I just like having the ratios off and winding up with something crazy, trying to blend something in a blender and just having it go very, very wrong. Clarifying cocktails and that just not working at all. So there definitely is that. There's also some disaster areas when it comes to photographing the cocktails, whether that be the entire cocktail gets knocked over, things get crazy. I mean, there's there's a lot of disasters in this. I would say my biggest disaster over all of them is washing a beautiful antique cocktail glass and breaking it. So that's
I've done that. It was my mother-in-law's gift to me. She gave us a set of these Italian crystal champagne glasses, and I was so excited at dinner, and I went to wash them, and I broke the stem right off it. I was very popular after that, you can imagine.
So I would say that's the biggest disaster of them all that can happen to anyone trying to take care of the glassware, and then, it just happens more than once, breaking the glass, and there's no way to repair it.
Oh, yeah, I could see that. Well, I have another one. Money Mo wants to know. Okay, now think of the name, Money Mo. On average, how much are all the ingredients per recipe? Any calculation or guideline of, when you spend too much on a cocktail in the ingredients?
Okay, in terms of making it at home,
Yeah.
I mean, it definitely depends on the product that you're using. I tend to recommend to my audience to buy, alcohol that is good sipping alcohol, but also good in cocktails. It's like when they tell you to cook with a wine that you would actually drink. You do want to mix with a spirit, a quality spirit that you would actually sip on. So I would not go after, like in these cocktails, I really try to showcase the spirit, so I don't want to cover it up. So
I think that's a great rule of thumb. Great rule of thumb. That's why I don't usually use barrel proof in cocktails. A barrel proof bourbon.
It's really hard because here I'm in Washington and we have over a 20% tax on alcohol. So my cocktail is going to probably be more than your cocktail. But really, when you make stuff at home, like the simple syrup, if you think about making a cup of simple syrup, and that you're going to be able to, you're going to be able to make like 16 cocktails.
Right.
That is cheap. So when you do make these cocktails at home, I would say it's like $1 for the citrus, 25 cents for the syrup, and then depending on your alcohol, that could vary. So, we're looking at like $2 or less, probably.
Well, Natalie, let me ask you a question, because this book is so visual and beautiful. Where can folks find this book, and can they find it autographed?
I do not have it autographed. I have to look into that. I didn't even know that was an option. So this book actually releases on Tuesday. So next Tuesday, the 25th of August. And it can be pre-ordered now on Amazon or Barnes & Noble.
Perfect.
On my Instagram account at Beautiful Booze, I do have a link in my bio.
Great.
Where you can go and buy it, as well as if you go to my website, which is www.beautifulbooze.com. There's also a link there where you can buy it.
Well, listen, I encourage everybody who's watching also to go to your Instagram. Thank you, Natalie, for joining us. We're so appreciative.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so amazing, and I love showing all the cocktails that I love and my favorite spirit bourbon, as well as my book. So thank you so much.
I hope to share one with you soon. Bye bye. You know,
Bye.
I saw Natalie for the first time when I was doing a fundraiser, part of a fundraiser that Discus, one of our sponsors, was doing. And, you know, I just want to tell you that Discus and Spirits United, you know, we're kicking off Women's Equality Week with the symposium, and they're giving us a voice. So they're very important for advocacy, legislation, things that actually help the consumer. So please keep that in mind as well, because that's how I found Natalie with Beautiful Booze, was the connection of Discus. So next on the docket, we have a Kentucky girl that we lost to Memphis, Tennessee. Now, I know that sounds terrible, but it was a good path because she became the master distiller for Old Dominic, and she was a trailblazer. Something that's even more impressive, she was trained by Jimmy Russell and worked at Wild Turkey for years. So welcome, Alex Castle.
Hi, Alex Castle with Old Dominic Distillery in Memphis, Tennessee. I am the Master Distiller and Senior Vice President at Old Dominic. Chris Canale, our fifth generation president, approached me back in 2015 about leaving Kentucky and joining the then very small team at Old Dominic. Chris knew I had a passion for quality whiskey, but I made him aware that I also had a passion for creativity, and he encouraged it. He even gave me permission, after a few years with the team, to create a line of products that I had complete control over. Old Dominic is a revitalized whiskey brand with a distillery located in the heart of downtown Memphis. We are located just steps away from the original warehouse where our founder, Dominico Canale, sold his whiskeys under the Old Dominic label back in 1866. Nowadays, we make 3 different whiskeys. We have a Tennessee whiskey, a bourbon whiskey, and a wheat whiskey. We also have 2 vodkas, and we actually just launched a gin this past spring. And while we like to call ourselves a whiskey distillery, we're actually quite a bit beyond whiskey. A few years ago, the Tennessee Distillers Guild fought to pass legislation that would allow distilleries in Tennessee to serve cocktails. We wanted to be able to offer more than just a tasting experience to our guests. We wanted the distilleries on the Tennessee Whiskey Trail to be gathering places for people to be able to spend time with their family and friends. Fortunately, we won that fight, but that win came with a fun twist. Every drop of alcohol that goes into that cocktail has to be produced at that distillery. So you want to serve a Manhattan? You need to make both the whiskey and the vermouth. What about a Negroni? You now have to make the Campari-like spirit as well as the gin. As someone who got her start in the industry over a decade ago, I had only ever produced whiskey. So this new legislation posed a really big challenge for me. My first real adventure in developing a product outside of the whiskey realm came about when we decided to make a gin. It was about 3 years ago when I was posed with this challenge, and I immediately ran into my first obstacle. I had only ever had juniper forward gins. I didn't like them. Turns out, I don't really like juniper. Kind of a problem when making a gin. Fortunately, for the sake of this project, I had attended a botanicals workshop at Moonshine University. And there I was exposed to a bunch of different botanicals that are very common in gin, and finally got to learn what they tasted like after they were distilled. Several of those botanicals I had never tasted before. If I could compare this process to something, it would be you having to cook a meal that is new to you. You don't have the recipe. You have to use herbs and spices that you've never tasted before. And to top it all off, other people have to really love that meal. How would that turn out? For me personally, based on my wonderful cooking experiences, it wouldn't go very well at all. Taking what I had learned from my experience at the botanicals workshop, I just started with the ingredients that I liked. Angelica root, chamomile, cucumber, coriander. And I just started combining flavors that I thought would be complementary. Sometimes it worked out. Other times, not so much. I continued tweaking the recipes, completely scrapping some of them because they were so bad, and then also creating new ones on a whim simply because a flavor sounded interesting. That was what was so exciting about this process. Never really knowing what that batch was going to be like or the one after that. After making small tweaks to a batch based on what I thought did or didn't work, just made it that much more exciting to go on to the next one. My first 2 gins were followed by a barrel rested gin. The barrel rested gin actually was a result of scaling up from a lab batch, which for us was a 1 liter still, and going to full-size production, which again for us is 250-gallon pot still. So it was a really, really big change in volume. And it wasn't as simple or straightforward as we thought. We ended up with a super liquors-heavy gin, which was not what we were going for at all. So to salvage that spirit, we decided to take a chance and put it in a used whiskey barrel. After about 5 months, the gin had actually mellowed out really nicely and actually resulted in one of my favorite products to date. We continued the creative streak and decided to develop a barrel-rested vodka that we then infused with coffee beans. Why? Because we could. Going back to what I mentioned before, we are beyond whiskey. We have the ability to make a lot of fun spirits, and it's just fun for me to do as well. I wanted a coffee vodka that you could use in cocktails. The barrel just made for a really nice, convenient holding tank. And as an added benefit, I actually got to learn how to roast coffee beans from a local roaster. How cool is that, getting to do something completely out of the realm of spirits? And just so you can see how not scientific some of these experiments can be, this is exactly how I developed the coffee vodka before going to the full-size barrel. It's literally just a 200 milliliter bottle with some vodka and whole coffee beans, and you just let it sit. There really was no science involved in this whatsoever. After the coffee vodka, we decided to finally start experimenting with bourbon. We hadn't done any barrel-finished bourbons yet, and a local brewery had actually aged some pretty funky beer in a couple of our used whiskey barrels. I didn't know what would happen if I put a bourbon back into that ex-bourbon, now ex-beer barrel. But again, thought, why not? What could it hurt? So in the end, I ended up getting an oatmeal raisin cookie bourbon. Talk about a delicious cocktail, or even just a delicious bourbon. Most, if not all of these products were created for fun. They were spirits that I thought would be delicious, and of course a lot of fun to develop. We bottled these under our R&D distillery release only line, and they actually sold pretty quickly, which was kind of cool. But they also provided a great training foundation to help develop a product line that would allow Old Dominic to extend its on-site offerings in a really big way. Remember that new law I mentioned? The one with the fun twist that allowed Tennessee distilleries to make cocktails? Well, it was time for me to get the bar up to par and fully stocked. My bar team presented me with a list of close to a dozen different spirits that they wanted to see behind the bar, some of which I had never even heard of. I quickly realized that Google and my neighborhood liquor store were going to be some of my closest friends during this research and development process. 18 months ago, I had never given a moment's thought to how Campari was made or what botanicals went into Fernet. But R&D starts like that. It starts with the unknown, the thrill of a challenge, and the excitement for that next batch. So where do you start when you know what the end product needs to be? For me, I start with the end product itself. I would sit with a bottle of Fernet Branca, taking notes on the different flavors and profiles that I was picking up on, guessing at what botanicals might be contributing to those flavors. Then I would combine those notes with a multitude of internet searches, some of which that claimed to have the exact recipe. They didn't. But I would finally have a decent starting point. Luckily, my experience in developing our gins gave me a nice idea of what a lot of botanicals tasted like once they were distilled. And now that I had a starting point between my notes and all of the different tastings, I could finally start experimenting. A few of the spirits were surprisingly easy to start. I made one batch of orange carousel, which starts with rehydrated orange peel, both bitter and sweet. And my bar team said, "That's it, you're done." So literally one batch of orange carousel, and we had it made. I could only hope that all of the other products were going to be that easy to develop. Of course, not all of the products on the list were produced with distillation. There were a couple on there that were produced with maceration, which is when you take the botanicals and you put them directly in the alcohol and let it sit and extract the flavors and aromas from those botanicals. Amaro, Fernet, and Campari are all produced using maceration. This felt like such foreign territory for someone who had only ever produced distilled spirits. My bar team wanted a traditional Amaro as well as a Fernet. And since both were produced using maceration, I decided to tackle them at the same time. With the Amaro, I got to have a little bit more fun after trying other brands' versions and seeing just the wide variety of product in the marketplace. So I started with 2 batches, completely different botanicals in each of them, just to see how they would turn out. And luckily, one of those 2 batches ended up being what my bar team was hoping for. So another check mark there. But what about our Fernet? I decided to base ours off of the popular Fernet Branca. Aloe, chamomile, bitter orange peel, star anise, rhubarb, and peppermint were just some of the key ingredients that would go into this product. And it was critical to not need any sugar in this product. It would negate the stomach settling benefit of this particular digestif. After 10 days of maceration, we had a really terrific Fernet. And this little jar is basically what the Fernet and the Amaro looked like during development. Now this particular jar is neither of those products. It's actually a bourbon product that we're developing. But you can still see all of the botanicals and spices floating around in the jar. Store in a cool, dry place like a cabinet, which is where I keep mine. And you just monitor it, taste it every couple of days until you've achieved the desired flavor profile you were going for, or, as in the case of this particular jar, you determine that it was a complete failure and you need to try again. However, the most challenging products were still to come. Absinthe, a licorice-flavored liqueur. I hate licorice. How was I supposed to develop a product whose predominant flavor I seriously disliked? And there was another question I had to answer as well. Distillation, or do I go the maceration route? Because absinthe can actually be produced with either method. Maceration typically yields a much stronger flavor profile, while distillation can actually give you a lighter flavor. Given the fact that I wanted to lessen the intensity of the licorice flavor, I decided distillation was the only option for me. Over the course of 2 months, batch after batch in my little 1-liter lab still, making just the smallest change to 1 or 2 ingredients at a time, it was a challenge balancing the various flavor profiles of over a dozen botanicals. With every failed batch, my determination to master this product only grew. Never did I think I would use my chemical engineering degree to produce absinthe. Never occurred to me. And then I found myself going from a product whose flavor profile was far from my liking to a product whose main ingredient was something I had never worked with: caraway. Aquavit is a Scandinavian distilled spirit whose predominant flavor is caraway. I had never tasted caraway until I opened my first bottle of Aquavit. And let me just say, I was not prepared for A, the taste, and 2, the intensity of the spirit. I didn't know where to start, how much or how little caraway to achieve a certain level of intensity. The only thing I knew was that, like absinthe, Aquavit would need to be distilled. And I knew it would take multiple batches on my little lab still to achieve a balance between the intensity and drinkability that I wanted for this product. This was definitely a case of pure trial and error, another phrase for research and development. And with Aquavit, there was some serious error. Too much cumin here, not enough caraway there. One batch had entirely too much fennel. It was a balancing act, to say the least. Who knew that when I became a distiller, I honestly also needed to be a chef? During this time of research and development, or trial and error, as I mentioned earlier, I never became so frustrated that I wanted to give up. Sure, there were days I wanted to go back to my normal production of Tennessee whiskey, but I did appreciate the challenge that was presented to me during this part of my career with so many unknowns. Even the failed attempts were fun, not tasty, but still fun for me. And Old Dominic was still determined to support me and encourage creativity. And my production team humored me and were my guinea pigs for all of those terrible batches, providing me with mostly comical feedback and suggestions. And the satisfaction at finally sitting down to our bar and seeing that cocktail menu that was just full of all of that effort was undeniable. So why am I talking about vodka, gin, absinthe, and Aquavit during a conference for bourbon women? Shouldn't I be talking about bourbon? The bourbon landscape is always changing, along with the spirits industry as a whole. We have bourbons aged in various barrels from various spirits and vice versa. Whiskey distilleries like Old Dominic are constantly having to learn to pivot to meet the demands of this new landscape. Distillers are coming from more varied backgrounds and have bigger plans that go beyond just bourbon. We know that the biggest marketing opportunity or asset is the distillery itself. There we have the consumer's attention for a full-hour tour, immersing them in our unique grain-to-glass processes, tasting them through every spirit. Now we have the opportunity to extend the invitation even longer and provide an elevated experience, a cocktail that was completely crafted in that distillery. For me, distilling and the spirits industry have always been about creativity and pushing the envelope, getting to try new things, whether it's a new production method or a new cocktail or something in between. It is more than whiskey, more than vodka. It's taking your talents and making something completely your own for others to enjoy. Sharing your products, your brand, telling your story, all in one cocktail at a big old bar under a giant neon rooster. I look forward to welcoming you to our bar and to Memphis. Cheers.
Okay, so the mystery continues of what is in my glass. I had Virginia Merriweather ask me if it's a Sazerac rye. I think the whiskey wash up, Weller, and Shannon Hood, Knob Creek. And I have to ring the buzzer, no. But as I was listening to Alex Castle, who I adore, I was kind of looking around at all the shelves of bourbon. And one of the beauties of working with Minnick Media, when they're live streaming, you get to sit in their studio. So if anybody can guess the brand and the date of this bourbon, you get all the bourbon that sits behind me. Is that okay with Fred?
No.
Is that okay? I just had to do that, I didn't want to distract him too much, but keep guessing. Now, Alex, we're so very happy to have you, and what a journey you have had. We've had so many questions come in. May I start asking you a few?
Absolutely. Let's get going.
Good. And you've actually spoken at our conference before, New Orleans Bourbon Festival. We've been together, but everybody seems to ask this question of you. Aaron, I think it's Weatherman, said, what is your favorite gin botanical?
Just through trial and error, one of my go-tos, honestly, is coriander. I
Oh,
love
really?
the citrus floral notes that comes from it.
Interesting. And that coriander has a little peppery for me.
It does. It's got so
Tiny
many
bit of
different
pepper.
layers.
Yeah, it
Yeah. When you
does.
distill it, it just takes it to a whole new level.
Exactly. And then can you make coffee vodka at home? Have you ever heard of coffee vodka?
Well, I made a coffee vodka. We did it for a distillery only release, and you probably could do it at home. We actually had our vodka proof down to, it was between 80 and 90 proof when we put it in the barrel, and just put whole coffee beans into the barrel at that point.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
I imagine we let it steep for about 2 weeks. So I would think that if you bought a bottle of vodka, make sure it's one you enjoy drinking, and just put a really good coffee bean into it. Let it go for about 2 weeks, taste it periodically, and you should have a really nice coffee vodka.
Oh, my goodness. That's a do-it-yourself at home, right? Good at staying home.
Absolutely.
And then you must be keeping a secret, because I have not heard of this, but tell us more about the All the Cookies bourbon.
So All the Cookies bourbon is, again, a distillery only release. We launched it earlier this year, about 2 weeks before the pandemic hit.
No wonder I haven't heard of it.
Exactly.
I haven't
It's been
traveled
on
anywhere.
lockdown. It's been on lockdown. But there's a brewery in Memphis that we partnered with. We gave them some barrels. They put, I think it was 4 or 5 different beers in all of these barrels, and we took 2 of the barrels back, one of which had housed an oatmeal raisin cookie beer. And it was my favorite beer of the entire collection. And so I was like, let's put bourbon in it. Let's see what happens. And it ended up giving us an oatmeal raisin cookie bourbon.
Oh, yum.
It is absolutely fantastic. Makes a phenomenal old fashioned.
It is not above me to dip an oatmeal cookie in my bourbon and eat it, just like milk and cookies.
I've never done that.
I am
but
not
I'm gonna
above
have
that.
to. I'm going to have to try that.
Yeah. All kinds of tips y'all are going to get tonight. I'm telling you right now. Yeah.
Love it.
Okay. How about, this is from Cocktail Contessa. If you've ever seen all her beautiful cocktails that she does.
Absolutely.
She said, how long did that process of creating all the liqueurs for the bar staff cocktails take?
It took start to finish. Of course, I had other things I had to do in between each of the products, but it took me probably close to a year, maybe a little over, to develop all. I think it's 6 of them at this point.
Okay. All right. So not too terribly long.
Not too terribly long. Some of them, like the Orange Carousel, took 1 batch, which
Right.
was a 2-day process, and I was done. And then the Absinthe took, I forget how many batches, and that was spread out over, I think, 3 to 4 weeks.
And then I had a question. Have you named the rooster? And the rooster is huge on top of the building. It's unbelievable.
13-foot tall rooster, neon rooster at that. He absolutely has a name. His name is Nico. Our founder
Like
is
Dominica.
Dominico, our founder, Dominico. We named the rooster after him.
Okay. That's what I thought. And so have you picked up on visitors now that things are opening a little bit back up?
So we actually had to close back down.
Oh, so sorry to hear that.
Yep, Memphis closed limited service restaurants and breweries and distilleries back at the beginning of July. So we had to stop all public-facing operations.
Yeah. Well, it's located in the best site of Memphis, right by Beale Street. Because I remember walking around.
Yep.
I've been to your distillery. It's gorgeous, of course.
Yep, great location. But yeah, unfortunately, closed down right now.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Now, tell me, what is a new project that you're working on? Are you doing anything else innovative that you want to tease us about?
I mean, we just released 2 whiskeys. We did a wheat whiskey as well as a blend of our high rye bourbon and wheat whiskey. Those just hit the market within the last couple weeks, including Kentucky. You guys finally have us.
Oh, yay.
Yep, huge win for this Wildcat here. But for next year, my goal is I'm still trying to just expand that R&D product line. So where all the cookies and the coffee vodka, just trying to come up with some really fun, unique products for that line.
Well, I know you will. And for the life of me, I couldn't remember. We tasted kind of an innovation when we were at the New Orleans Bourbon Festival last year, and we did the women's panel. And I was wondering, what was it that we tasted? It was that special. Yeah. Well, everybody went wild over it. I mean, it wasn't even on the market yet.
Yeah, I can't even remember. Was it it may have been our 2-year Tennessee whiskey.
Gosh, I thought it was even older than that. But it was amazing. And you know, speaking of amazing, you were trained by Jimmy Russell. So tell me personally, what was the most special thing he ever taught you?
What I remember about Jimmy isn't so much what he taught me, but his stories. That man is full of the most amazing bourbon industry related stories. That honestly is what stood out to me the most. But working with him and Eddie both, I got to work with Eddie and was fortunate to get that experience. They both are just so incredibly talented, so knowledgeable. I can't believe I was able to work with both of them. And
could you tell that there was a difference between the way Eddie trained and Jimmy trained? Like, did one focus more on
styles?
Oh, they what?
They definitely had different styles. I think Eddie had a slightly more technical aspect to it, whereas Jimmy had been doing so long, it wasn't technical to him. It was just second nature. Yeah. Whereas Eddie definitely had could explain it more technically. But like I said, it just was an honor to be able to work with both of them.
I bet. And when you had to conduct tastings, what do you feel like you've kind of carried with you on tasting the whiskey and identifying flavors, and teach some of the people viewing like the most important way to taste?
The biggest thing I picked up while I was at Wild Turkey, and actually I learned it from our plant director at the time, was don't actually spend too much time. Like if you have a lineup, don't spend too much time on it because you're going to end up overthinking it. You really just want to, if you've got 3 samples, hit 1, 2, 3, and if possible, don't even go and revisit them. Just hit them just one at a time and go quickly through them, just because you start to get in your head otherwise, and start to convince yourself that what you liked the first go around you no longer like, or vice versa.
Right. I think it's great advice. And, you know, as I'm doing whiskey reviews, I'll even just open a bottle and just get my very first impression, just nosing the lid area, you know, and the bottleneck.
First impression says a lot.
I know. And it's just what hits me. That's what I want to know. So it's kind of, everybody has their own style, I think, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. To me, there's really no wrong way and there's no right way. It's whatever works for you. And you're becoming a teacher now because you had another woman that joined you, Zoe, correct? Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. We've got, Zoe in marketing. My production team has 2 women. Like we're growing. I love it. I love it that you're putting women in those places. We're so grateful that you joined us. And I have to tell you all, Alex drove all the way from Memphis here to Louisville to video everything. And it just means a lot. You're a longtime friend of Bourbon Women and a longtime friend of mine. Thank you. Thank you. You take care. You too. Okay, so next we are going to bring, are you ready for this? Drag your bourbon lemonade through the garden. I have no idea what that means, but at the same time, I cannot wait to see it because we have beautiful Katie Tobin from New Riff joining us.
and she's going to do the video. But let me just tell you something about New Riff. I think it's one of the hottest new distilleries right now. I am in love with their Balboa rye. I think it's incredible, and they've had such incredible growth over the course of the last couple years. So I'm kind of anxious to see what they have to say about it. So we ready, Fred?
Let's do it.
All right.
Hi, I'm Katie, head of the cocktail program here at New Riff. We're standing at our Aquifer bar where we do cocktails and flights. I'm excited to show you around. We're an urban distillery here in Greater Cincinnati. We make bourbon and rye whiskey with 6 fermenters feeding 2 copper stills. This 24-inch diameter copper barrel still is a classic piece of Kentucky bourbon making equipment. On the back of our bottle it says, "A new riff on an old tradition." That's the meaning of our name. We learned the old tradition, which is Kentucky sour mash whiskey making, but we want to do a new riff on it every time. We want to learn the tradition but play it our own way, and that's what we aim to do with every recipe we make. All New Riff whiskeys are bottled in bond. We recognize that to be the highest standard for aged brown spirits in the world since 1897. How could we not bottle everything we make at the world's highest standard? And so we do. All New Riff whiskeys are also bottled without chill filtration. Chill filtration is a cosmetic filtration. We don't do that here because we don't want to diminish or attenuate any of all the good things we love about whiskey. Our bourbon is made with 65% corn. It's a non-GMO and it comes from us from a single-family farmer just up the road in Indiana. We think he's the best corn farmer in the bourbon business. Our rye whiskey is made with 95% rye and 5% malted rye. That 95% rye comes from Brooks grain in Northern Europe, and we use it because we think it's the best rye that there is. The first thing we did when we built New Riff Distilling was go looking for a more unique water supply than the municipal water of the city of Newport. We discovered an aquifer 100 feet below us. It gives us 500 gallons a minute of very mineral-rich, very hard, 58-degree water, and it allows us to run every day of the year while providing a tremendous green energy savings to the distillery. It also provides the basis of our big, broad flavor thanks to the big tasting water that we have. It is unique to us and very special water, we think. I'm going to let Jay Erisman, our co-founder and vice president, tell you more about our whiskeys.
Let's talk about bourbon. Here we have New Riff's flagship bourbon, New Riff Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, bottled in bond without chill filtration. This is a grain bill of 65% corn, 30% rye, and 5% malted barley. So a high rye grain bill. We selected this from the beginning, wanting to make bold whiskey, intense, full-flavored, spicy stuff. Let's have a taste. It enters the mouth sweet, sweetish, turns a little drier in the mid-palate as that 30% rye makes itself known. A lot of spicy flavors, clove, cinnamon, sometimes things like grain of paradise or black pepper. Sometimes some minty themes creep in as well. And the rye spices ride out on the finish. It is 4 years old, as all New Riff whiskeys are, a minimum of, and we hope you enjoy it. Let's talk about rye whiskey. This is our flagship rye, New Riff bottled in bond without chill filtration, Kentucky straight rye whiskey. The mash bill on this is 95% rye, 5% malted rye. And so we call it 100% rye. It takes the spicy flavors inherent to rye and puts a big spotlight on them. We often find grains of paradise. There's often a minty theme in New Riff rye, sort of spearmint, wintergreen, or maybe even sassafras occasionally. It's an intense whiskey with that 100% rye grain. It also can be a little bit sweeter than some ryes are. And again, a nice broad, big mouthfeel. that New Riff whiskeys are known for. Here we have New Riff single barrel whiskeys, our single barrel bourbon and our single barrel rye. What makes these different than other people's single barrels? We actually barrel in a little bit different process than most distilleries. The way most distilleries operate in Kentucky, and this is a very good way to operate, is that they distill a batch of whiskey and it goes in a tank. And they distill another batch of whiskey and that goes in the tank. They distill 10 more batches of whiskey, those all go in the tank and they get mixed together. And then they cut that and it goes in the barrel and it ages. That's not how we do it at New Riff. For better or for worse, the way we operate, because we're small and because we don't have tanks that can hold that many batches of whiskey, we distill a fermenter of whiskey, it goes in the tank. It gets cut to barreling proof of 110 and it goes in the barrel. The next lot gets distilled, that goes in the tank and that gets barreled and so on. What we wind up doing is preserving the flavor of each batch of whiskey, each fermenter of whiskey, and each of our 6 fermenters develops a little bit different flavor on a little bit different day. We can't explain why, but they're all a little bit different. One is sweeter, one is spicier, one batch is drier, one batch is really thick, one batch needs a little more aging. Each batch is a little bit different. That means at the end of 4 years, what we get out of a single barrel is not merely the difference from a barrel to a barrel to a barrel, but from each lot, each fermenter of whiskey has been protected, discreetly bottled, and aged for 4 years. It leads to a tremendous range of flavor in our single barrels. We hope you enjoy them. Let's talk about single barrel whiskey. Here we have New Riff's very popular single barrel bourbon, Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, and bottled at barrel proof without chill filtration. This is the same grain bill as all New Riff bourbon, 30% rye, so a high rye mash bill, and 65% corn. That rye delivers, again, a spicy smack on the palate, but with a little more intensity given the high proof. This particular barrel is 112.7 proof, so a very tractable whiskey. You can drink it straight if you like, and it won't take your head off. Big and broad, it enters sweet, but turns drier in the mid-palate with a panoply of spices, cinnamon and clove and wood spice sometimes a little bit, almost reminding of cedar, a very spicy and intense dram. That whiskey is 4 years old, as all New Riff whiskeys are, a minimum of 4. And like everything we do, it's bottled without chill filtration. Here we have probably our most intense rye whiskey. This is New Riff single barrel rye, barrel proof without chill filtration. This one is 111.8 proof. That's typical, although we do see some of our barrels getting down to 107 or 108 proof. This is, again, a grain bill of 95% rye, 5% malted rye. So we call it 100% rye. 100% of this spicy, bold, intense grain. Flavors here of clove and maybe wintergreen in this barrel, and melding with the wood very nicely, and some sweetness in the nose as well here. It's very approachable at that proof. You can drink it straight up if you like, and it won't take the top of your head off. That's our single barrel rye.
So today we're going to be making our purple haze. It's essentially a bourbon lemonade. We're just going to be making a regular lemonade and then adding some fun elements to it, one being bourbon. I'm also going to show you a way to kind of incorporate some fresh herbs you might have growing in your garden right now. We're also going to be adding a tincture to the bottom, which is going to create a little bit of a color changing effect in the glass. Again, just to make that a little bit more exciting. So we're going to hop right in. We're going to be using our blended bourbon. So we're going to do 2 ounces of that right into the shaker tin. And then I'm going to be adding 1 ounce of lemon juice. Again, you can use lime, really anything just adds that kind of brightness. Now I'm going to be adding our simple syrup. I'm using a brown sugar simple syrup here, but you can use honey, you can use white sugar simple, anything for that little bit of sweetness. I did 1 ounce of that as well. And we're also going to add a little bit of water. So this will just create a little bit of a smoother cocktail instead of getting it overly sweet or overly bright with that lemon juice. I'm going to do about a 1/2 ounce. I'm gonna fill this with ice. And in there as well, I'm gonna be adding some fresh herbs. So here I've got some rosemary, some thyme, oregano, basil, sage. I'm gonna be using mint. I think a mint lemonade is just one of the most refreshing things in the whole world. So you can just kind of try and grab the tops of them. You don't need the bottom stems, just really the leaves. And these will kind of self-muddle in the shaker tin. All right, and I suggest serving this in a highball glass. You can do something shorter, but you get a little bit more of that ombre effect of the color changing. Plus we're gonna top it with a little bit of club soda. So I think it's just a little bit better to serve it in there. I'm gonna put a straw in, and I'm gonna be using this Blur. This is a butterfly pea flower extract. It's also got a little bit of hibiscus in there. Doesn't really add any flavor. It's subtly sweet if you try it by itself, but it's really gonna add this nice color changing effect. So there's a property about butterfly pea flower that when it hits citrus, it goes from this really dark blue purple to a bright pink. So I'm gonna do about 4 or 5 of these full dropper fulls in the bottom of the glass. And then we're gonna fill this with ice. And strain this right in. And leave yourself a couple inches at the top again for that club soda. And you'll notice if I agitate the straw, you get a little bit more of that effect there at the bottom. So we're gonna top it with our club soda. And then to reincorporate that mint element, I'm gonna put a little bit of fresh mint there on the side. And then you can always put just a regular lemon or lime disc depending on what kind of citrus you used. I'm gonna show you another way to kind of elevate that garnish some more. So we're gonna do a peel flower. Essentially, I'm gonna take a Y peeler. This is just a regular vegetable peeler. We're gonna start right at the base, the top or the bottom. I think this flatter spot's a little easier with the Y peeler. And we're gonna go around probably about 2 times. And you'll notice I'm just really moving the lemon, not the peeler. It's an easy way to save your fingertips. Just kind of shake it to break it off there. So starting where you started with your peel, we're just gonna kind of roll this in on itself, keeping the peel tight so that it doesn't fall apart on you. And then we're going to take our cocktail pick, just poke that right through there. And you'll notice you get all these layers. So there you are, Purple Haze. I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Thanks for letting us take you around your Riff today and show you some more about it. Cheers.
I was just kind of rocking to the music of the video here. Amy Tobin in the house. How are you?
Good. I'm so good. Glad to be here. How are you?
Oh, I love it. And I loved all of the healthy at home options. I thought it was fascinating. And I did have quite a few questions roll in. So do you mind if I ask a few?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Okay. Jackie Williamson wants to know, how was that bottle design created? Who is responsible for it? And it's so unusual to have kind of a dark bottle.
Yep, it's so unusual. And I think it kind of flows with just our brand statement. We're a new riff on an old tradition. So we're actually using a very classic bottle design, but we're doing something that you don't really see on the shelves. I can't think of another bottle that's really remotely like that. We're actually able to, we tried to get them in the United States. We outsource our bottles from Paris, France. So they were the only ones, the only glass manufacturer that could ensure that ombre was part of the glass. And then not to mention we have that embossed statement on the front, the bottled in bond without chill filtration. So we literally etched it or embossed it into our glass. So we're, pretty serious about it. But yeah, it stands out for sure. A beautiful bottle, helps us to sell our product, but then they kind of speak for ourselves once you open it.
Absolutely. It's gorgeous. And Jackie French wants to know, when do you anticipate increasing distribution? Because I'm not even sure geographically. Why don't you educate everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, just our immediate surroundings, we are widely available. There's a lot of other places. You can actually visit our website and it'll show you kind of everywhere we sell. In a perfect world, we'd be able to ship all over the United States. I mean, that's what we aim to be, is one of the great, just small distilleries of the world. So if we can be overseas, we'd love to be everywhere. We're also trying to stay kind of really in that realm where we can be intimate with our experience and kind of slowly, keep a little bit to mystery. So as things develop, we're ramping up production. We're actually opening our second rick house right now, which is pretty exciting. Yeah,
great
so
news.
Keeping it up. We've got a lot out there, but slowly dispersing it so that as to make sure we can do it thoughtfully. So I'd say if anyone's interested in kind of, it can never hurt to reach out to the right people, but sales@newriffdistilling.com. If you email them, they can kind of give you a little bit more information, kind of where we've got some feelers out, things like that. But.
Well, I think you're wise. I see all too many craft distilleries because I work with quite so many. And they want to be all things to all people and expand to markets like immediately. When really and truly, I think slow growth and moving into a market, then saturating that market is so wise for a craft, distillery to do, because you just can't be everything immediately. And patience in this industry pays off. That's all I know. All right.
Everything.
So let's see. Carol Ormay wanted to know, how does the 100% rye wash bill actually compare to the others that you have?
To the others, does she mean single barrels or to our
I'm assuming
bourbon?
so.
Single barrels?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think we have a really interesting single barrel kind of distribution in just what we offer, because we do have a very high rye bourbon. So that sets us apart already. And then our rye comes in, our blended rye, our flagship rye comes in at that 100% rye, 95 regular rye, 5% malted. I actually find personally our blended rye to be smoother than our bourbon.
Oh, do you?
Because in our bourbon, that high rye content really stands out. So our bourbon will put hair on your chest, but it's got that smooth finish. So you get the best of both
We're not
worlds.
afraid of that
corn.
as women.
Exactly. No, not at all. That's the thing. It stands up. It's really nice. But then our rye, and I've noticed actually a lot of women lean towards our rye, whereas a lot of men start out and they're like, this is really spicy. And I'm like, traditionally, this is a very untraditional rye.
Well,
It's really
frankly, women, and that's why I mentioned your Balboa rye that I am such a fan of. Love it.
Yeah, same.
But we, as Bourbon Women Association, we kind of debunked the myth over the years for all the different distilleries to say, hey, don't make it light and airy and low proof and sweet for me, because we won't like it. What we want is spicier, higher proof, and more robust.
Yep,
and that's what you're doing. So this is kind of a women's whiskey, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. And I would also say that our product really lends to, I've experienced that some lower proof stuff is very more boozy to me. It's got a lot more alcohol flavor. Whereas now they have me so good and spoiled on our bonded proof, the 100 proof. People come in and they say, whew, we've got 114 proof here. It's going to knock my socks off. I think it adds to our chill filtration, but also the fact that we have a very approachable bourbon and a rye. We have ladies come in all the time and they're like, yeah, I generally lean towards this and towards this and towards this. It's a very complex and spicy flavor, but there's a lot of flavor there, especially in the high proof stuff. And that's not always the case, which is really interesting. So
exactly. And how long now have you been a member of Bourbon Women?
Bourbon Women, I think a couple years. My mom actually got me started.
I know she did. Right.
Yes.
And that's what's so cool that I always tell everybody, because you've been to Symposium, is that every year we have over 300 women come to Kentucky, and mothers bring their 21-year-old daughters like a badge, like this is their first entree into bourbon. And then we have aunts bringing their nieces. We have sisters coming in for it. We have girls' weekends, friends that live in 2 different locations of the United States that make it their annual pilgrimage now. So haven't you found that Symposiums become something really special?
Oh, it's incredible. And it's insane how many people I realize that I actually know when I go. I mean, it's often I go to bourbon events and I'm like, when you look at someone, you're like, oh, hey, but it's crazy. It's recognizable faces. It's people that I'm constantly running into. I mean, there's a lot of really good groups and things and people getting together under good causes, and a lot of it happens to be women.
Absolutely. And we've even had some women just come by themselves. They didn't know anybody, but they love whiskey, and it's a bonding. It's this universal welcome. And I just know you all have enjoyed it just as much as I have. And
so much.
Yeah. And we've loved having you on this. You all stepped right up to help us, and we're very grateful. Very grateful.
Oh, thank you. Likewise.
Well, listen, you take care. I sure do hope to make it up your way very soon. Very soon.
Yeah, definitely. You guys will have
Okay.
to come and see us. And thank you so much for having me.
All right. Stay safe. Stay safe.
All right, you too. Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, so back to, I feel like this is like, where's Waldo, right? It is not Baker's. Susan Reigler, you were wrong. Uncle Nearest, nope. No Wild Turkey 1980, but good idea putting a date of 1980, but it might even be earlier than that. McKenna Tenure, no. Maker's Mark, and Bourbon Women Private Select, well, that would have been a natural, but no. So be creative. Ask me for a few hints now and then. I'd be happy to help you out. I'm just happy to drink it at this point. And speaking of drink it, Manhattans. Is anybody a Manhattan snob? And I don't mean that cruel, but you love a good Manhattan when you go to a bar. And sometimes when you go to pick up your Manhattan and you're going to taste it, you immediately smell like, oh, that's too spicy. They put too many bitters in it. Or, oh, good God, is that a maraschino cherry? What is this? You know, so I hate to admit it, but I like a good Manhattan. And nobody better to talk about what to add in a cocktail as far as cherries go than Carol Ormay. My good friend, longtime Bourbon Women board member, is here to tell you how to be a cherry connoisseur. So here we go.
Hi, I'm Carol Ormay. I'm a longtime member of Bourbon Women. I also serve on the board and chair the events committee. Today I'm here to talk to you about one of my favorite subjects besides bourbon, but it goes along with bourbon, and that is cherries. Now, when I order a Manhattan, and I'm not much of a cocktail drinker as a rule, but when I order a Manhattan, there's a couple of things I look for. Number one, I look for the color. Nice, rich, brownish red color. And the second thing I look for is the cherry. Now, if somebody brings me my Manhattan to me and it's just got your standard maraschino cherry, like you got in your strawberry sundae back in the day, I feel like I'm not in for a good experience. So that's why I am a little particular about my cherries, and I wanted to talk to you today about some of the ones that I have found that work really well in all kinds of cocktails. Now, the first one is the Luxardo cherry. Now, this is the gold standard of cherries, or at least it has been. It is imported. It has a really nice syrup to it, nice round cherry, looks very juicy. This is the typical cherry that a lot of people use. Now, my new favorite, though, is this one. This is the Traverse City Whiskey Cherry. Now, if you're familiar with Traverse City, Michigan, you know that it is the world capital of cherries, at least in the United States. And Traverse City Whiskey has started making their own cured cherries. Delicious. As you can see, very plump, juicy. It has a nice syrup to it. It's fairly thick, not super drippy. Makes a nice addition to your cocktail. Now, two cherries over here, you can see they're much fatter than the other two. These are Bada Bing cherries. And the other thing about Bada Bings is, you notice it's got the stem on it. So when you have it in your cocktail and you're at the end of your drink, it's very easy to dive down into that drink and pull out that cherry. Now, Bada Bing has a couple of different cherries. These are bourbon infused. They've been aged with just a little bit of bourbon, and you can smell it. And then this is their traditional Bada Bing stem-on cherry. No bourbon in that one. And you can see the juice on these is not quite as thick. A little bit more juicy juice as opposed to something like the Traverse City, where you've got almost a cherry syrup that comes out of it. So that's my take on cherries for today. And we'll take one of these and cheers.
Hi, I'm Susan Reigler with Bourbon Women. A lot of you who are big bourbon fans have really enjoyed exploring different kinds of bourbons, different ways that bourbon is produced. You know, we have the high proof bourbons, the single barrel bourbons, the small batch bourbons, just a whole variety of variations on the theme of bourbon and other American whiskeys. You may or may not have become acquainted with finished whiskeys. These are bourbons and ryes and other whiskeys that are either when they're first aged as they're supposed to be by law, in new charred white oak, and then in some process or other, maybe put in a second barrel for aging. And in that second barrel, there have been a variety of techniques explored for that. And I want to tell you a little bit about some of those bourbons that have been finished in secondary barrels. First of all, and these are just examples, there are many more than this, but these happen to be the ones I had sitting in my cabinet at home. First, I think we could talk about the bourbons that were finished in a second wood barrel that was primarily designed for that second finishing. Just take it out of the first barrel after it's aged for whether it's 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, whatever the distiller has determined, and then age it for some weeks or months or a year longer to get some more flavors. Because if you have talked to any distillers, they'll tell you that all of the color and a good 70% or so of the flavor of bourbon comes from the aging process in the oak. Maybe adding a little more oak can do something else to the flavor. Well, that's certainly what Woodford Reserve decided to do when they produced their double oak bourbon. And the double oak is put in a second barrel for a period of time, which has been deeply toasted. And this imparts a different flavor to it. Apparently Brown-Forman, who owns Woodford Reserve, was only going to do this as, you know, a limited release, limited time offering. And the double oak became so popular that it is now part of their regular portfolio, has been now for many, many years. And there are people who are just really absolute huge fans of the double oak. I think it tastes a little bit like maple syrup up front. So it's extra sweet, which I think is a fascinating effect from a little more wood. Then there is another Brown-Forman product. This is an Old Forester. And this has been part of the Whiskey Row series, something that I've very much enjoyed. Just because the bottle isn't open, I won't tell you which number bottle this is that I've purchased over this period of time since this has been out a little over a year. But this is a fascinating story. It's called 1910 because there was a fire in the bottling facility at Old Forester, and it sort of damaged some barrels, and the whiskey was kind of put into other barrels. They were kind of extra charred. And what Old Forester does today is they take the regular expression of Old Forester and they put it in a secondary barrel that has been charred so deeply that the barrel would fall apart were it not for the iron bands that holds the barrel together. And that imparts a really interesting sort of smoky, chocolatey, fascinating depth to Old Forester. It's a little higher proof than the regular Old Faux, but I think it's well worth seeking out. Very, very interesting expression in a secondary barrel. Again, just oak barrel, but toasted, charred differently. Speaking of toasting and charring differently, Maker's Mark has a fascinating private barrel selection program that uses different barrel staves that are different kinds of oak and are toasted or charred at different levels. And when you go to do one of these private barrel selections, you actually sit in a large room with a lot of samples of whiskey that's been exposed to these various staves, and you mix and match combinations of those staves to extract flavors that you think you would like to have in your private selection. Now, what's fascinating too about that is that they have to give you a reference book. So makers will provide you with this little booklet that explains the different chars and different toasts, and they tell you about the oak, and you get kind of a little chemistry lesson there. And it talks to you about the types of wood used, types of toasting that is done, the level, so that you can make lists and sort of keep a log of this. This is like a seared French cuvee, right? So they have different symbols for this. It tells you about the toasting. So they have several different of these staves, and then whatever combination, if you would like 3 of one or 2 of another, you have to select a total of, I believe it is 10 different staves, and it can be any combination. So you wind up picking those, and then the staves are put on a giant ring. It looks like a giant key ring full of large wooden staves, and that's put down in the barrel, which is sealed back up and aged further, and then you come up with a really unique flavor profile for Maker's Mark, your own private selection. Then another wood secondary barrel technique. This is a rye. This is Buzzard's Roost, which is a pretty new release. In fact, it's only available in Kentucky, so if you're lucky enough to be here, you may find this. They have both a small batch and a single barrel. It's aged about 3 years or a little more, and then the owner of the company, he sources his whiskey from MGP in southern Indiana, and he's very upfront about that. But he partners with a cooperage to specify the particular toasting and charring that he wants for his secondary barrel, plus a special proprietary carving of the staves inside the barrel to make them sort of wavy and to have extra surface area for absorption. And he comes out finishing this in his own special technique, and it makes for a very, very smooth, very mellow rye, very full of flavor. Kind of, I think I've compared it to a Christmas pudding. A lot of fruit in it for a rye whiskey, which I think is really quite fascinating. Then, of course, probably the finished bourbon that most of you will be familiar with, especially if you visited Louisville and you've gone on any distillery tours, is the Angel's Envy. And this is part of a different category of finished whiskeys, in which the whiskeys are finished in a barrel that held a different kind of spirit for a while for its aging. And Angel's Envy just kind of started that trend by aging its whiskey, its bourbon, in used port wine barrels. They aged their rye in used rum barrels, and that lends a little wine note character to the bourbon. Very, very interesting. I think a lot of people consider this kind of a gateway bourbon for people who are wine drinkers but maybe haven't discovered whiskey yet. So Angel's Envy does the port wine finish. Another Louisville distillery, actually I think have all Louisville producers here, Rabbit Hole, and Rabbit Hole's bourbon, they have various finished products. This particular one is PX sherry barrels. Again, lends a real sweetness, extra sweetness, fruity sweetness to the bourbon. And then there's a company that is, again, here in Louisville that does an enormous array of experimental finishes. Now, this particular bottle isn't one of their finished products, but I have this with me just so you can see the shape of the bottle, because all of their bottles have this kind of configuration. It's pretty easy to spot on the shelf. The only downside is that some of these really special finishes, they only make about a barrel's worth at a time, so there's not a lot of it on the market, but if you're very lucky, you may find it in a liquor store around Louisville. And you can also look up Barrel, with 2 L's on the end, Barrel Spirits on the internet, and they have some ordering information there too, or where to buy it. And they've experimented with a wide range of used barrels. Calvados brandy, port, various types of sherries, various types of Madeira, Tokay, the Hungarian wine Tokay, just some fascinating things. Red wines from California, cognacs. So if you really want to see the effect of that secondary cooperage on flavor in whiskey, it'll be, I think you should try to find one of those finished barrel bourbons. So that's just a quick introduction to the extra special finishes. We could go on for a long time about the influence of the barrel, but I think the secondary barreling is something that's very, very interesting. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan, as I call her the bourbon professor. Is there any doubt why? That's for sure. We have had so much fun together over the years, the same with Carol. And Susan was actually our president for quite some time for Bourbon Women. And it was early on when we only had 2 branches in Indianapolis and Chicago. So we had someone ask, well, how many branches are there now across the nation? And we have 11 branches. I'll read them to you. There's Louisville, Atlanta, Chicago, Indianapolis, Michigan, Missouri, New York, Northern Kentucky, Cincinnati, Tennessee, Texas, and DC. Now, the reason why that's important to know is because those are formal branches that do events, etc. But we have Bourbon Women in almost every state across the nation because you belong to our national organization. And that's why we're here tonight, to support this organization and let us continue bringing good education to you. If you've liked what you've seen so far and you're not a Bourbon Woman yet, go to bourbonwomen.org, and it's only $50 to become a member. Someone had asked that question. And then also, if you are a Bourbon Women and you have experienced symposium or any event that we have done in the past, the education, the content, the networking, and frankly, the camaraderie among these women, then please contribute. No level is too small, and we have all variations. Just go to bourbonwomen.org or jump into the competitive zone and go to Raising the Bar, our symposium auction. I got to tell you, Fred, it was getting really strategic yesterday on women saying, you know, let's bid on this and go in together on that. And I had quite a few texts that people were saying, hey, did you just outbid me? So it's not over till tomorrow night. I think at 10 o'clock or so. So you have some more time to bid on that auction. Now, next, I'd like to bring up somebody very important to me, and she has a couple sidekicks with her. This is going to be WhistlePig, and I have to tell you, of all the names of the seminars that we're doing, this I felt was like blew me away. It was the path of yeast resistance, from microorganism to whiskey. So put on your geek goggles. You heard me. I'm bringing in Ingrid Rodriguez and Emily Harrison and Meghan Ireland. And actually, I met Ingrid. Gosh, I'm trying to think how long ago that was. Ingrid was back in probably a year or 2 ago at Whiskey Obsession Conference. And she walked in and we were on a tasting panel together. And she was amazing. Her palate was sensational. She was bold and feisty and just one of those women that walks into the room and everybody notices her. And we just kind of bonded, and I admired her, ended up writing an article about her, frankly, because she's an ambassador for WhistlePig. I wrote an article in American Whiskey Magazine about her. And so had to have her on this show. So Ingrid, Emily, Meghan, are you with us? All right, great. We're going to do the video and then we'll come back to you shortly and have some questions, okay?
Hi everyone, my name is Meghan Ireland and I am the Quality Assurance Supervisor here at WhistlePig Whiskey.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily Harrison and I'm the Distillery Manager here at WhistlePig Whiskey. Today we're going to talk about the path of yeast resistance, how yeast goes from a microorganism to whiskey.
The word yeast itself tells its history. A cognate, or it exists in most languages referring to its action. French and Spanish refer to yeast's lifting properties. English and German refer to boiling. Greek has a few words, but one of them just refers to beer. We knew what yeast yielded and what yeast did long before we knew what yeast was, and utilized its ability to make great wine, beer, and later, whiskey.
First up, we're going to talk about the evolution of yeast, how wine and beer correspond with the development of human society. In Neolithic times, man invented the wheel and presumably wine. Winemaking was very likely man's first experience with yeast because all that was required with winemaking was to crush the grape and wait for it to ferment. This is because yeast lives on the skin of the grape. So all that it needs in order to ferment is exposure to the fruit's sugar. 1,000 years later, Sumerian civilization carried on the tradition of utilizing yeast to make wine. Yeast sequenced from a wine jug from 3150 BC closely matched the modern yeast strain Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is the yeast strain used in many modern breweries, wineries, and distilleries today. Sumerian culture also gave us another classic beverage from yeast, beer.
Beer is a little more complicated than wine. Where wine just requires crushed grapes and patience, beer requires malted cereal grains and the addition of live yeast cells to get fermentation going. Sumerian, Egyptian, and Babylonian cultures all practiced malting to make beer. But there were several different methods that could be used to add live yeast to the wort. Beer described in an ancient Sumerian text, the Hem to Ninkasi, was recreated in modern times. To inoculate the wort with live yeast, grapes, and raisins were used. Other methods of inoculating wort included allowing bees or wasps, which carry yeast, to land on malted grain, adding fermenting wine to the beer wort, and eventually adding fermenting beer to a fresh wort to begin fermentation.
I mentioned before that yeast sequenced from a wine jug from 3150 BC closely matched modern Saccharomyces cerevisiae. This strain of yeast is not only an essential component of many human activities, including baking, brewing, distilling, and winemaking, it is also found only in areas close to human civilization. As cerevisiae, being so vital and so closely tied to human activity, points to the idea that before humanity knew what yeast was, we knew what it did. Our ancestors made and kept starters, yeast cultures chosen and cultivated for their specific purposes of baking or brewing, and passed them down. Originally, these cultures were natural isolates, but as they were passed from batch to batch, and humans picked out what they liked from each beer or wine or bread, the starter yeast diverged from its wild ancestor. Humans domesticated yeast before we knew it was a living organism.
The next part of the story is the discovery of yeast, the story of microscopes and lactic acid. I'm going to apologize in advance for any mispronunciations of names that we do in this next part. In the 17th century, Antony van Leeuwenhoek, inventor of the microscope, observed yeast for the first time under a high-quality lens. He described yeast as globules floating in a liquid, but he thought they were merely the starchy particles of the grain from which the wort was made. At the time, nobody believed that yeast was alive. They were just seen as organic chemical agents required for fermentation.
In 1815, Joseph Louis Gay-Lussac was experimenting with a method for preventing perishable foods from rotting. It's the same process we use for canning today. The method consists of boiling the wort in a vessel and then tightly closing the vessel containing the boiling fluid to avoid exposure to air. Gay-Lussac was interested in using the method to maintain grape juice in an unfermented state for an indefinite time. With this method, the grape juice remained unfermented for long periods of time, as long as the vessel was kept closed. However, if yeast was introduced into the wort after the liquid cooled, the wort would begin to ferment. There was now no doubt that yeast were indispensable for alcoholic fermentation.
When more powerful microscopes were developed, the nature of yeast came to be better understood. In 1837, Theodor Shawn, a German physiologist, observed that during alcoholic fermentation, yeast multiplied by budding. This observation confirmed that yeast are single-celled organisms. Shawn also theorized that yeast eats sugar, needs nitrogen to survive, and that they excrete ethanol. From Shawn, we also get yeast's scientific name of Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which translates to sugar fungus beer. Chemists at the time denounced the idea that microbes were causing the transformation of sugar into alcohol, believing it to be a chemical process instead of a biological one. Microscopes of the time were better than the ones Leeuwenhoek had used, but they weren't great, and Shawn had no concrete proof.
In 1856, a man named Reigler sought French chemist Louis Pasteur's help because he was having problems at his distillery, which produced alcohol from sugar beet fruit fermentation. The contents of his fermentation containers were embittered, and instead of alcohol, he was obtaining a substance similar to sour milk. Pasteur analyzed the chemical contents of the sour substance and found that it contained a substantial amount of lactic acid instead of alcohol. When he compared the sediments from different large containers under the microscope, he noticed that large amounts of yeast were visible in samples from the containers in which the alcoholic fermentation had occurred. In contrast, in the polluted containers, the ones containing lactic acid, he observed much smaller cells than yeast. What Pasteur saw was bacteria. Pasteur's findings showed that there are two types of fermentation, alcoholic and lactic acid. From here, he proved Schwann's theory that yeast ate sugar to be correct. Fermentation is a biological process where yeast consumed sugar and produced alcohol.
In 1755, Samuel Johnson defined yeast in the Dictionary of the English Language as the ferment put into drink to make it work, and into bread to lighten and swell it. A century of science and discovery proved the yeast to be a living or microscopic fungus, which reproduces by budding and metabolizes sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide.
In this next section, we're going to talk about yeast in whiskey and about proprietary strands and how yeast affects flavor profile. When Daniel Bacardi fled Cuba in 1960, he destroyed every batch of the fast fermenting yeast strain that made his rum. Bacardi planned to start over in Puerto Rico, and he didn't want the new Cuban government to have a competing product. Early winemakers and brewers passed down starters of yeast, preserving strains that produced the best tasting product. Yeast, however, is prone to mutation. New strains crop up easily, and preserving the old strains became a closely guarded trust. Some large distilleries still have proprietary strains like this, strains that were handed down through generations, with starters now kept in a lab and backups kept off-site in case something happens. Other distilleries acquire their yeast in different ways. Some are wild, reflecting local terroir, and many more are purchased, selected for their ability to affect the final product. No matter how a distillery approaches their yeast selection process, they are all agreed that yeast is a fundamental part of fermentation.
Don Livermore, Hiram Walker's master blender, created a flavor wheel that illustrates what exactly fermentation brings to the whiskey. Yeast creates so much more than alcohol. It creates butyl oils, esters, carbonyls, organic and fatty acids, and even sulfuric compounds. Some of these compounds, like esters, yield desirable fruity and floral notes, but others, like sulfur, yield less desirable flavors. With this number of flavors coming from the single-celled organism, you can see why a business may closely guard their yeast strand. It creates the foundation to their whiskey, and changing that would change everything.
Next, we're going to talk about what we're doing different right now. Most distilleries aim to keep their yeast consistent from batch to batch. After all, it's a key flavor component, and consistent yeast means a consistent product. Around a year ago, we got tired of the same routine and wanted to try a new yeast. The only problem was we didn't have any different yeast isolates lying around, so we went to nature. We took crab apples, honey, oak, maple syrup, anything that might have a natural yeast isolate, and we began our wild yeast experiment. So, as I mentioned earlier, some of our sources of wild yeast have been things like crab apples, oak trees. You can get it from pretty much anywhere, including flowers and vegetables, and we even got a strain of yeast off of our pig's back.
Which I do not suggest. That's probably been one of the worst ones we've got so far. So we just took like a sterile cotton swab and swabbed the back of Mortimer Jr.'s back and pulled yeast off of that cotton swab. When we ran the beer through the still and our distillate came out, the flavors that we got were incredibly barnyardy, kind of catty.
Yeah, the catty component is what stood out to me. They're very, I mean, it makes sense for something that came off of a pig's back, is all I'll say there. Some of our better yeast strains that we've tried, my personal favorite was the one that came off of our rye fields. For this one, we did an open method of catching yeast where we just left a jar with malt extract in it, covered in a cheesecloth, left it out in our rye fields. And the yeast that we pulled from there, we nicknamed it Pineapple Balm because the pineapple flavors were just very prominent in it and it fermented very well.
It's just like overwhelming pineapple right from the beginning. We also did another one I thought was super cool, was from our Vermont oak, which we also used the wood from Vermont oak to finish. So it was a nice kind of like roundabout thing to be able to pull yeast off of the oak as well. When we got the yeast from that, it ended up being very winey, kind of champagne type flavors to it. It turned out pretty well. We were excited about that one.
Yeah. Another one I really enjoyed for very different reasons though is our honey. So a local beekeeper came to us asking for ethanol to preserve a dying bee that he had to send to a sample for a lab. And in exchange, he gave us some fermenting honey. So we took the honey and we got the yeast out of it. And for a while there, it was just tasting like normal mead. But then it got infected with lactobacillus and started producing lactic acid as well as the alcohol. So it turned into a very like sour mead flavor. Just very interesting and nothing I've ever had before in terms of flavor profile of a distillate.
So this project has given us the ability to really see what different flavors you can pull from yeast and how big of an impact that it has. We've, over the last few months, sent out kits around the country to pull yeast flavors from everywhere. We sent them all out to our sales team. A really cool one that we got was from a vineyard out in California. You just swipe some grapes, like as we talked about before, you have yeast on the outside or on the grape skin. That one turned out really good and really cool, so that's an exciting one.
One that I'm a little less excited about is one of our stewards in New York City pulled a yeast sample off of his rooftop garden in New York City. I've been a little tentative about opening that sample. I've been assured it's fine, but we'll see how that one goes when we get there.
Wow, that was incredible. And I told you, put your geek goggles on because you learned a lot. And I have to tell you, learning to become a master taster, Lincoln Henderson was the master distiller who taught me. And his quote was always, yeast is the soul of bourbon. Because he believed in that quality and, the strain and et cetera, that it made such an effect on the body of the whiskey. So I have to give credit where credit is due. Millie O'Donnell, you are on fire tonight. She said, if I had bourbon in class, I would have done better in school. I'm sorry. I love it. I love it. That is the humor of Bourbon Women. I'm telling you, witty, clever, intelligent women all coming together to have a good time over a glass of bourbon. So speaking of good time, I've got my three ladies who just presented to you, and we have quite a few questions. I think everybody did pay attention in science class. Welcome. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, the first question is the whiskey mash, or mashup rather. What yeast would be recommended for someone who wants to experiment with a home brew?
Honestly, if you're experimenting with a home brew, I would start by just, going into a homebrew store, finding something, if you're planning on making it into whiskey or bourbon, find something that is a high alcohol producer. You can experiment with different brewing yeast strains as well. We've tried hopped mashes, and pretty much anything with alcohol makes whiskey, makes distillate. So just experiment away, try different ones. Don't be afraid to get a little out there too and use weird things like hops. Yeah.
All right. And then Crystal, I think Barrios asks, can you talk about open air fermentation in relation to the yeast strain? Some people really believe in that open air.
Yeah, and we have open air fermentation ourselves. So open air fermentation, we use it because we pitch our yeast fresh every time, which means we make up a new batch and pitch it every time. Why a lot of brewers don't use it is actually because they harvest the yeast from the previous batch, like old school distillers used to do.
We call that setback. Right.
Yeah.
Or back set, either way.
I've heard it both. They use that back set, that old ferment, and put it in the new one. So it mutates, it changes. They want to keep like this completely pure environment. But with our open air fermentation, we pitch fresh yeast every time and get a consistent product.
I see. Now, a girl named Cute Coffee Gal said, how was Homestock developed, the brand Homestock?
Ingrid, you want to talk?
Ladies?
Yeah.
So Homestock was actually something really interesting that WhistlePig decided to do during COVID, and it is specific to our quarantine measures that we have. We had partnered with an online purveyor, and we sent 700 different kits across the United States. Those kits for the first time included other than rye whiskey. So we had our Vermont rye whiskey, which is made up at our farm. These ladies are the ones who put that together for us.
Oh, wow.
A wheat and once we sent that out, we had everybody blend their own, went online, put in what they wanted it to be, and then our master distiller picked the top 3 blends. Our master blender. And then we did it again. We did an online program. We had about, I want to say almost 1,100 people that were involved in it. And out of those 3 blends, they picked the favorite blend, and that's ultimately what became Homestock. Homestock is technically Farm Stock 4. If you read the mash bill on the back, it'll have all of that information. It'll have the COVID. But I must point out that it's technically not a rye whiskey. It is an American whiskey.
Okay.
It is only 45% rye. So completely different product than WhistlePig has ever come out with. But it was amazing to watch how quickly we were able to pivot in a time of quarantine and insecurity and have people really come together and blend this together while we're all apart.
Oh, wow. And then another question was, do any of the yeast strains impact the body or the mouthfeel?
Yeah, I can answer that from a quality point for sure. For us, I would say the biggest one that we personally did came from our Vermont oak tree that we pulled yeast off of. The mouthfeel had a much more overall coverage in your mouthfeel, thicker kind of feel to it. So it's always interesting to see how that can affect it, and it does have an effect on it.
Yeah, I bet it does. And then how many different yeast strains are there in the world?
In the world? Oh God, I don't know about in the world. For WhistlePig, we use two ones we have two standard ones that we use, and then we've done full large scale experimentation with 3. And then as Ingrid knows, we also sent kits across the country to all of our stewards and asked them to collect yeast from their hometowns or areas of importance to them and have them send those back. So we're slowly working on growing those up and seeing how those turn out.
Now, I'm curious. Oh, go ahead.
When it comes to actually how much is in the world, it's probably pretty infinite at this point. Since
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeast is everywhere. Everywhere. That's why I love when you said you pulled it out of the Vermont tree. I mean, that makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
For junior.
Then it's indigenous, right? Yeah. Yeah. Did Dave Pickerel teach you that?
We've learned a lot from Dave Pickerel for sure, and his experimentation and
his drive toward innovation really is what still drives innovation.
Absolutely. You know, Fred and I off camera were talking about how special, you know, Dave Pickerel was to the both of us growing up in this industry, and just always happy, but just so intelligent in making whiskey. And I learned something from him every time I'm around him. Do you agree, Fred?
Yeah, there's not a day that goes by that I don't miss him, you know. And right now, actually, I didn't even think about it, but I put my pin on here.
He has his Dave Pickerel pin on tonight.
I got this pin at his memorial. You know, I've got his face hanging up in my office, and he's special. You know, Dave Pickerel was to me, he was whiskey.
And WhistlePig is special. I mean, I think that was in my opinion, one of the first craft brands that really caught fire. Don't you agree?
They definitely caught a lot of attention.
They were early.
They definitely did. And I love to see the talent coming up the ranks too. Watching that presentation, you know, so many people were talking about, like, I wish I could get credit for this in college and everything. And, you know, it's just such a great time where we can geek out on yeast. And
I love it.
That was a great presentation.
It was fabulous. And I'm just curious, what are all of your favorite WhistlePig products? Like, what's your favorite?
Ooh. My personal favorite is 12-year. I started in bourbon, and 12-year is my favorite just because of the sweeter flavor profile. And I also like the stories behind it as well, in terms of creating a symphony of flavors with different wines.
I would have to say I think my favorite is the 10-year, just because it's such a big part of who we are, and it's got the big, bold, spicy rye in it, and it's kind of our base, it's who we are.
That's right.
We're across all the boards, because my favorite is 15, hands down. It takes that 100% straight rye and kicks it up, especially for some of those single barrels that are out there.
Oh, I love it.
Absolutely. 15-year is such a wonderful product, and holding that 15-year line on age statement, amazing.
Well, you all make wonderful products all across the board. And I just have to laugh a little bit, because when it comes to asking you all technical questions about yeast, you all answer like this. When I say, what's your favorite WhistlePig product? It was like, you were stumped. That's a good thing, maybe, right?
What's your favorite WhistlePig product, Peggy?
Oh, I always like the piggyback.
Oh, nice.
I don't know, maybe that was one of the first ones, I think.
So mine is the it was the Boss Hog Dark Prince. It
Black
won.
Prince,
I first tasted it at San Francisco World Spirits Competition, where it won it, and I swear it was the best whiskey in the world for that year. So good. And I used to get in arguments with Dave about how that was his best one, because every year he would say, no, this one's better. I'm like, no, Dave, it's not Dark Prince.
Yeah. We've had a ton of fun with you ladies, and thanks for bringing your energy, your intellect, and boy, Ingrid, I sure hope to see you traveling at a whiskey conference again. And I've yet to come see you, you know, at the distillery. I was supposed to do a barrel tasting there not too long ago, you know, pre-COVID, and hopefully we'll reschedule that another time.
Yeah, we'd love to have you come up.
All right. Thanks so much, ladies. Really appreciate it.
Yes. Bye. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you. Well, I have to tell you, the next people that we have on are two of my favorite people in the industry. There's just no doubt about it. They make me laugh. They are so intelligent when they talk whiskey, and that's what I'm saying. If you think you heard earlier about yeast, etc., wait till you hear the backgrounds of some of these ladies. And this is Sherrie Moore and Victoria Butler from Uncle Nearest Distillery. And as you know, Uncle Nearest is one of the most award-winning new American whiskeys in the United States, and they have a reason to tout it. So I'm going to play their video. I was lucky enough to drive to Tennessee, Shelbyville, Tennessee, at the distillery. We are 6 feet apart, if you will notice in the video, so I hope everybody can hear it okay, but we had a ball. I gotta tell you, this industry, sometimes you think it is so big and you'll never meet all these people in the industry, and then you wake up one day and you realize how small it is, because all of these people that you worked with from the past come into your life in the present. And so I've got to tell you, I am so excited to have Sherrie Moore and Victoria Butler here with the Uncle Nearest team today, because I have to tell you, ladies, we go a little ways back with how we knew each other and then how we came to be today. And so for those of you who don't know, we all formerly worked at one time on the Jack Daniels brand. And as I sit here now in this beautiful visitor center for Uncle Nearest, projects that all of us worked on together, you know, fast forward to present day, I'm just so reminded of all the wonderful times that we've had with these girls and how proud I am of them as women and what they've done for our industry and how they've contributed. So I think I really want to start with everybody learning about your path in the industry. And so Sherrie and Victoria, tell me how you kind of got in the business. You know, what attracted you and why did you stay?
Well, you know, my story is a little bit unique.
Yes, it is.
I have not always been in the spirits industry. I have a background of 31 years in law enforcement, quasi law enforcement with the federal government.
That's why I watch my step with you.
Yes, absolutely, because I still have friends
I
in
know
high
you.
places.
I know you.
So my background was in the analytical field, assisting law enforcement with their investigations, the DAs, the investigators out in the field. So that is my background. And last year in March, prior to that, I was thinking about retirement. And of course, I knew Fawn. I had met Fawn Weaver, our CEO of Uncle Nearest, and met her through, her meeting my whole family. Right. So the timing just was perfect. And I retired and went to work for Uncle Nearest within days.
And that special tie, if you'll let people know what that was.
I am Nearest Green's great-great-granddaughter.
Which, frankly, is amazing to me. What a legacy, for you, Victoria, to be able to work in the shadow, of what he built. So it's incredible. And so now today, you're the master blender.
I am the master blender, the first Black woman to have that title.
I love it. I love it.
Me
Sherrie,
too.
how about you?
Well, I started in the industry in 1975. Some people may know or have heard of Miss Mary Bobo's boarding house.
Absolutely.
And she wanted me to come live with her, and I said if I could get a job in Lynchburg. So I came over there, and Roger Brashears called me and got a job at the Visitor Center. So I paid my way through college working there and ended up staying 31 years, started at the Visitor Center, and ended up as director of whiskey production.
And what did you do as director of whiskey production?
Well, I had charcoal mellowing, the distillery, the byproducts, warehousing, processing, environmental quality control for both bottling and for the distillery.
So do you feel that most of your experience has been kind of that on-the-job
I have been roll up the
Roll up the
sleeves
sleeves,
and
get it
work.
done, girl.
I work.
Yeah.
When you started in this industry in '75, you had to work.
Absolutely, and I have seen this girl roll barrels. I have seen this girl do it all, and so that is so true about that.
And I did get a chemistry degree.
Right.
That helped.
Oh yeah, that little chemistry degree.
But I had to work.
Yeah, and then how did you segue over to Uncle Nearest?
Well, I had retired from Jack Daniels and was selling real estate. And the Weavers had come to Lynchburg. So their first trip to Lynchburg to investigate about Uncle Nearest. My cousin met him on the first day. And she called me and she says, you need to meet this couple from California. And they want to see the farm where Uncle Nearest made whiskey, the Dan Call farm. And will you show it to them? And will you share numbers with the Weavers of the Green family so that they'll get to know people? So I was their real estate agent. So I met them on their second day, and that's how I got connected. So, you know, some people ask how I got back in the industry.
Right.
I didn't go looking for it. It's
Right.
like it came to me,
Yes.
and it's been a good fit.
And do you agree that once you have the hospitality industry and the spirits industry in your system,
yes,
it is one big hard thing to shake?
Oh my goodness.
Yes. Right?
And me, you know, I'm still new to it. You know, having been in the industry, what, a year and a half now? I can't imagine doing anything else.
I know, it's just you're bitten, if you will.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's what I feel
Absolutely.
like this brand that you all have all built together, you know, through Fawn's leadership. It's the fastest growing craft whiskey in the world, right? I mean, that's what I understand. And so how did that first meet and greet, and all of the things that came after that, what do you all contribute the success of the Uncle Nearest brand to? What do you think it is? What's the
I
magic?
think it's a combination of things. The story, it is a very dynamic, true story about a once enslaved man who taught Jack how to distill, the relationship that the two of those men shared, and then the background, the history behind all of that Fawn Weaver brought to the forefront for the world to know. Mm-hmm. And then the team that Fawn, of course, as the leader of our team, has assembled. We have a very strong, committed, dedicated team that drives this brand every day. And then our whiskey is good, Peggy. You know?
Which you're going to let me taste some.
Oh, absolutely.
I didn't travel all the way down here just to go empty-handed.
Absolutely.
That's for sure.
And Sherry may want to expound on that, but those are the things that I think has driven the story. People, not the story, but the brand. People cling to history. They want to know about it. Nearest Green was a very unique man in those times, given what he brought to the spirits industry. And now folks want to know about that, especially in this day and age.
Sure.
People want to know what this black man contributed. And then the people that are on this team are so incredible. Yeah. You know, they have a long background, a long history in regards to their experience, like Sherry.
Well, and Sherry, I'm just curious, like, what would be some of those contributions on a production level that you feel, you know, Nearest Green did?
Well, of course, I grew up in Tennessee whiskey versus bourbon. Right. And that process is unique and it changes. Mm-hmm. It changes the whiskey, it changes how it ages, it changes the taste, the chemistry profile. You can tell the difference before the charcoal and afterwards. And the whiskey, of course, right now we're doing sourcing, and it has gone through the Lincoln County process. Mm-hmm. So we're starting with whiskey as close as we can purchase. Right. And of course, we're designing our distillery now to where we'll start making our own and incorporating that. And I think that's an important part of this, is sticking with our story, and I might be biased, but I think that process creates just a taste profile that most people like. It softens it, and it should take out the headache. Now, if you're mixing sugar with it and you drink too much, you're still going to get a hangover. But it really takes out some of those congeners and makes it age better.
And so, you know, as you all conduct tastings across the nation, technically, and I know you're doing a lot of virtual tastings, like, you know, kind of like what we're doing today, what's the one thing you want a consumer to know about this whiskey brand? What do you think is the most important takeaway that they could possibly have after drinking your product?
Well, I don't know if it's the most important, but what drives us is that we are cementing Nearest Green's name in history. That is the driving force behind everything that we do. That what Nearest Green contributed to the spirits industry will never be forgotten. Yeah. Now, you know, we're sitting here on in our visitor center, our welcome house here at the distillery, and we're building out this millions and millions of dollar facility. Yeah. So we're here to stay, right. And so that drives us, and we want people to come here years and years from now and know who Nearest is or learn who he is. Absolutely. So cementing his name in history forevermore is what drives us. And then, you know, we want people to enjoy the taste of our whiskey.
I agree with her on that. But from a production standpoint, I want us to design and create a facility that makes whiskey he would be proud of.
Absolutely.
Because as much as he liked the story, he would want us to have good whiskey.
Yes. You know, would he not? It's interesting because I remember interviewing Fawn one time last year and asked her the question, you know, if you met Nearest Green today, you know, what would you ask him? And I had no idea what she would say, but I knew it would be something special, and it was. And she said, "How am I doing?"
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How am I doing? Mm-hmm. And I think that's literally what your whole facility here in Shelbyville is going to represent.
Absolutely.
You know, it will be the new icon, you know, for this brand. And, you know, speaking of brands, I would love to taste, and I know, Victoria, you literally blended the 1984.
The 1884.
I'm sorry, 1884.
Yes, I did. That was my first blend is the 1884. That's another nod to the family of Nearest Green. It was birthed. That idea was birthed out of wanting to get the family involvement, and the intent was to have a descendant of Nearest Green to be the curator of the 1884. And I, already being on the team, had the privilege of being that first one. And so far the only one. Yeah, right. So our 1884, it is 93 proof, and it is closer to what we think Nearest put in the barrel. So at some point, Fawn realized or confirmed that I was pretty good at this curating, blending thing, and elevated me to the title that I have now as Master Blender.
Well, and I have to say too, between both your palettes that, you know, I can't count how many tastings I've done with Miss Moore over here, and Victoria, there's something that we share still. You know, even though we worked together years ago and work together sometimes present day, we all love to cook.
Yeah.
And I just, call me crazy, but I just think when people understand culinary flavors, do you agree that it makes you a better taster, taster, master blender? It makes you a better mixologist. And so I always try to teach people, listen for food flavors. Do you feel like that's influenced you at all in your tasting? Or what's a tip you can give that's really influenced you?
Well, I think it all goes hand in hand, because the more we exercise and are conscious of our palate, whether it's with food or whiskey, it's going to make it up. But you know, it's just like, I'm out here tasting from those kids just about every day, because I want to keep my palate very sensitive. And when I'm cooking, I am tasting the whole time. I don't care what the recipe is. I'm tasting.
Or how many times you've made it.
But I think it's this great sense that God gave us, and we need to exercise it with food and with whiskey.
I agree.
Well, then it's time to taste.
It's time to taste.
Okay, Miss Peggy. So everyone who knows you knows that you are the queen of hospitality and that you love serving other people.
I do.
But today, Sherry and I are going to serve you.
All right.
We have, so we have our 3 expressions of Uncle Nearest. Okay. We're going to start with the taste of the 1884.
Love it.
That is the bottle that I mentioned earlier that I curated.
Yeah.
Yes. It has been on the market for a year.
It's beautiful.
So let's have a taste of that.
All right. Now, what was your inspiration going into this? Just curious.
So in regards to what you taste, you are tasting my palate.
Oh.
So for the first time, or for every time that I've blended, of course we start off with really good whiskey. So the choices are not difficult to make. So I never have to exclude something that is bad. I just include those I like most. And then we blend those, and the final product is what you have there in the bottle.
Am I correct to say a nice honey nose?
It is. It is. It's 7 years old, approximately 7. It's a blend of different ages, but it's 7-year-old, and it is 93 proof, and it's good.
It is just lovely. It is just so.
I hate for you to drink alone.
I know. I'm almost embarrassed that I drink alone. I mean, you know. But it's just so approachable and friendly. And again, those honey notes are just subtle and refreshing.
So you like it?
I love it. I think you, cheers to you, girl.
Well, I'm going to get me a little bit too. We might as well take a toast.
I was just saying, you got to do a toast.
Cheers.
Cheers to you. I love it.
Cheers, Master Blender.
Now, what are you actually selling most of here at the Visitor Center?
Well, it's kind of 50-50 in regards to the 1856 and the 84.
Okay.
The 56 is what we launched our brand with just a little over 3 years ago.
Oh my goodness.
So we're still young in the spirits industry.
Yeah.
So this is what we started with, and then of course our 1820 is our single barrel, and you can only purchase this at the distillery.
Well, I think we need to taste this.
I think we should.
And I'll tell you, I've always loved that kind of hunter green band on the side. It reminds me of this facility because, you know, that kind of hunter green is the signature color.
So Sherry and I will join you again because we don't want you. We don't want you drinking by yourself.
I appreciate that. Ladies, you all are always thinking.
Yes. So notice the color.
It's
it's very different from the 84. It's darker.
Yeah.
The bottle we're drinking today, Sherry, you have to read it because I don't have glasses on.
I'm older, but I can read it. It's 112.2.
My kind of whiskey, I'll tell you.
Delicious.
You know, it's funny because a lot of people don't know this, but women actually go for the stronger, more robust, spicier products. And so single barrels, right up my alley.
It's right up our alley. So what do you think?
I get just this really crushed pecan and real nutty note with this. Am I correct to say that?
A lot more complex.
More complex. I get some brown sugar.
Yes.
And a little bit.
It's like
so there again, we're thinking about baking.
We are, absolutely,
Yeah.
no doubt about it. And baking spices, I would say,
Absolutely.
are part of this product.
Absolutely.
That, you can cut that with a knife.
Isn't that good?
The texture is beautiful. It's
really
a
good.
beautiful mouthfeel, beautiful texture. I have to say, it's almost like a surround sound finish. It doesn't hit just one part of your mouth, but surround sound.
And doesn't have a harsh burn.
Not at all. It's very silky, very textured, and very well done. Just like you women.
Well, thank you.
I have to
Thank
tell you,
you.
I have had more fun. You have no idea how much fun I have had with these ladies. In fact, when the camera goes off, we're probably going to continue. I'm not going to lie. But we so appreciate you and what you brought to the table for women in the industry. And again, cheers to you. Cheers. Cheers.
More to come. Yes, absolutely. And thank you.
Yeah. Bourbon Women.
Bourbon Women. Yes.
Bourbon Women.
Thank you.
That's good, isn't it?
It's good.
Well, I don't care what other people say about Sherry and Victoria, but I have never detected a Lynchburg accent. Did you all on that? Actually, it's one of my favorite things I think about them. And before I bring Sherry on, I feel kind of rude right now because I haven't invited you yet to my home. Have I not done that yet? I haven't invited anybody to my house. because if you want to come to my house and have a great Kentucky dinner and a bourbon pairing and a selection of fine whiskeys. Oh, and by the way, you can bring some friends, and I'll bring 3 of my expert friends, and we'll have the time of our lives. A true Kentucky bourbon experience. If you like that, then go to the Symposium Raise the Bar live auction, because there's only one more day left. And if you don't see other things that you might want on the auction, that's okay. But we sure would love you to take the time to give us a little support so that we can put on the real Symposium conference next year at our 10-year anniversary. And I just want to take a minute just to thank our sponsors again, Discus, Spirits United, all the brands who have helped us. And for all those distilleries out there that really want to create a conversation with women, we are your organization to do that. And if you believe in that, feel free to let us know if you'd like to be part of our Amber Circle to help continue scholarships for younger women to become part of our organization, attend Symposium, because it will help them financially. And next I have Sherry Moore. Sherry, are you with me?
I'm here.
I love it. I'm so glad you joined us. And of course, we had a flurry of information come in that everybody was so curious. But number one, tell us your situation right now with the distillery. Are you all open right now?
No, we've got construction going on in the buildings, and the tour experience we have shut down because of the COVID.
Yeah. So at this time, they should probably check your website or,
Yes.
phone. Probably best to do that because it's been up and down for every state, honestly. It's kind of hard to keep up with. And then I also had a question from Laura Guerra. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Since you are blending, when do you plan to release your own bourbon, and will it be in a state-grown grain?
Yes. We planned at least. It's funny, I was at the grocery store, small town. I was in the grocery store talking to one of the farmers about getting corn from him tonight.
Oh.
So we do. Not only do we, small town, so not only do we plan on the corn being local, but this is within just a few miles of the distillery, not just in Middle Tennessee, but it's right here in our community.
Yeah. Exactly. And then can anybody get 1820 anywhere, or is it only at the distillery right now?
It is in some select markets, but we have so few barrels. So it's really kind of on allocation. So you'd have to check with the liquor store and your local liquor store.
Okay. And then what's I'm curious, your personal favorite? I didn't ask you when we were in Tennessee together. What's your personal favorite Uncle Nearest brand?
I like the 100 proof. I'm the 1856. I like that. I just like the 100 proof whiskeys. I like all of them.
I don't know why that does not shock me. Yeah.
Yes, I love that. And then I always enjoy a single barrel. And what I like about the single barrel is you never know what kind of taste you're going to pick up.
Yeah.
Because of what that individual barrel was.
Absolutely.
But my go-to is 1856, but I enjoy the 1820.
Well, and unfortunately, we didn't have time to tour the whole distillery of what buildings you all are renovating and all of that. But can you give everybody a sneak peek to the future? I know it's hard to do right now with COVID, but what can people expect on the brand destination coming up?
I think that we're taking one horse barn. It's 300 feet long. It had 50 horse stalls in it, and we're converting it to a single barrel warehouse storage facility. And it probably will be up by the end of this year, maybe even
It's
sooner,
a gorgeous
but
building. Gorgeous building.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be good. And I love that it's so long. So when you're walking that tour path, you're going to be walking through that many barrels.
Which is
not just going in there and going out, but you're going to walk all the way through the barrel.
Exactly. And then Sherry, because you're born and raised, in Lynchburg, tell me why you feel in particular that Tennessee whiskey is special.
I've kind of taken it for granted just a little bit. Because that's what I grew up with. but especially being with Uncle Nearest, and we're designing our distillery, and I'm looking at the extra cost that goes with the Tennessee whiskey. I'm even more impressed with it, and just calculating the flow rate and seeing what an extra step that does. And it also gives you more entry dates into your product before it goes in the barrel, so you get a consistency. And no, I am a big supporter of the Tennessee whiskey.
Well, I went to UK. You and I will never agree on football, sports, or bourbon over Tennessee whiskey or any of that, but you will forever be my friend. I promise you that.
Well, good. And I'm not going to turn down a glass of bourbon. Don't get me wrong.
I know. I've never seen you turn down a glass of bourbon.
No.
I'll tell you that. Anything else you'd like to add that maybe the audience should know about your brand or your product?
Well, I'm going to have to put in a little plug for Victoria. I thought she was going to join us, but she was on the Today Show, her and Fawn, this morning.
And she blew me off for the Today Show?
I think so.
You got to be kidding me.
Probably did a great job.
I'll be calling Fawn in the morning.
Good.
I'll text Fawn. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, so... But they both did a great job. If anybody gets a chance to go back and look at that segment, it's worth it.
Oh, I'd
and
love
you get to see Victoria.
Well, that's good to know.
Really good.
See, that's what I'm saying. I'm glad you shared that with us, and we can look that up. Yeah, because I'd love to see her in action. That's great. Well, Sherry, thanks so much.
The other thing
go ahead.
I appreciate everybody's support. Everybody has been so supportive of our brand, and we just really appreciate it because that's what makes it, the consumers and word of mouth.
Yeah. Well, Fawn was actually our keynote speaker, I should say, at last year's symposium, and it was very special. And you all have been great supporters of Bourbon Women. We appreciate that.
Well, appreciate you having us on.
Absolutely. You take care, and we will be together again soon, I'm sure.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Take care. I just love that Sherry Moore. I'll tell you what, they are so much fun. And listen, we're going to move. Speaking of fun, does anybody like to pick barrels out of a warehouse? Can you imagine doing it for a living? I mean, that's one of my probably favorite things to do when I worked at a distillery. And still is one of my favorite things to do when I source different whiskeys for clients, etc., or do tasting programs. It's so much fun because it's almost magical. Walking through that dark warehouse, wondering which one's the honey barrel, as we say. So we have Bullet Distilling. Melissa Riff is joining us, and she does it for a living. And she's going to tell us tonight how to do it, why you do it, and what to look for if you ever go on a single barrel pick.
Hi, welcome to the Visitor Center for Bullet Distilling Company here in Shelbyville, Kentucky. This beautiful modern distillery and visitor center opened to the public about a year ago here in Shelbyville, right in the heart of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. And since then, we've hosted thousands of people from all across the country and the world coming to learn about Bullet, a brand that they've come to know and love. And what I do specifically here, my name's Melissa Riff. I host our single barrel program. The single barrel program hosts retailers, bar owners, whiskey clubs, charities, general bourbon enthusiasts every single day who come to find one unique barrel that suits them. They can put it on their shelf, call it theirs, and there's not going to be anything else like it in the world. So what we're going to do today is take you along the journey of a single barrel pick, right from arriving to the visitor center, going through a private tour to our distillery, kind of honing in on the three main factors you want to consider when picking a barrel, which is the mash bill or the recipe that's been used for the grains, the yeast strain that's been used in fermentation, and the barrel aging process. So we'll touch on all three of those things and then bring you back to the visitor center, head down to our speakeasy style tasting room hidden behind a bookshelf in the lower level of the visitor center, and talk through how to facilitate a tasting for a single barrel. Really talk about how to refine your nose and your palate to pick out those nuances, and by the end of it, talk about how to find a barrel that's special to you. So thanks for joining us today. We'll get started on tour. All right, so here we have the first stop on our tour, which is the grain wall, talking about the natural resources that start the entire process for making bourbon, and those are our cereal grains. So by definition, bourbon does have to be at least 51% corn. We're going to be using a combination of corn, rye, and malted barley to give us a nice spicy flavor profile for our bourbon. Now your mash bill is where you make a decision on how much sweetness versus spiciness you want to be pulling from your grains. So here on the wall, we have some graphics of different representations of how you could choose your mash bill. We've got high wheat down here on the bottom, not something we make here in-house. Other brands are going to be using a high wheat to acquire a sweet, very mellow, almost syrupy kind of flavor. Right in the middle, a high corn is going to be something that gives you really soft, really light flavors, great drinkability, almost like a light brown sugar to that profile. And then up top, that's our wheelhouse. So we're all about bold, spicy flavor profile, using a high rye content, making it a great bold sip of whiskey, stands up to a couple ice cubes, and also great in a craft cocktail, which is really kind of how we've grown our prominence and popularity. Now our average mash bill as far as making bullet bourbon is going to be 68% corn, 28% rye, and 4% malted barley. But we actually use multiple different mash bills to give us some complexity and some layers to our flavor. And the big difference in those two mash bills are going to be 21% rye in one of them and 36% rye in the other. Both considered a high rye content, one a little bit lower than the other. So we're really going to see some variability in how much spice is cutting through, how much fruit is going to balance with that, the body of the whiskey and the mouthfeel. When we do a single barrel tasting, we're always going to have a representation of both of those mash bills on the table so that people can compare and contrast, maybe see which one they like better, and just get an iteration of everything we have to offer that goes into our flagship product. Now once we take these whole grains and we receive them from the farms, we have to mill them down to a finer consistency to get ready for mashing. So we take our hammer mill here on site, and we're going to mill things down almost to a cornmeal-like consistency, and that's when we head over to mashing and talk about adding our yeast. So that's going to be our next stop on the path. Follow me over there. All right, so now that we've talked about our grains and our mash bill and how we're balancing the sweetness from our corn and the spiciness from our rye, we're going to cook all of those grains down in the mashing process, really access all of those sugars, and the next big thing to talk about is yeast. And yeast is one of the most fascinating parts of the alcohol making process because the yeast is going to eat all of your sugars in fermentation, and that's where we get the alcohol. So that's where the magic's really going to be happening. Now we could just use one yeast strain and one mash bill and try and recreate the same flavor in every single barrel. That'd be kind of tough and it wouldn't be very complex. So what we actually do is we already talked about our 2 mash bills. We go all the way with 5 yeast strains. So I've got representations of each of these yeast strains behind me here. It's what we call our yeast library. And each one of these strains is going to carry with it a unique flavor, from kind of leathery and banana to some fruity, creamy notes. Slight leather is going to be a nice earthy, musky flavor profile. We've got really fruit forward with strawberry fruit, and then jackfruit's going to be kind of a juicy tropical type vibe. Each one of these is going to combine individually with each one of our mash bills. So it's going to be giving us 10 overall flavor profiles or 10 recipes. So every time you sit down and sip on a single barrel, you're tasting one of those 10 recipes. When we're crafting our flagship products, all 10 of those different recipes end up being aged in barrels until they're ready. They pull them out of the warehouse and they layer those flavors together for complexity and also to really find that consistency within them. But the fun thing is when we go to taste our single barrel products, we get a lot of variety in those single iterations. And again, variety is key because we want people to find what suits them, what's going to be the perfect match for them. So now we've talked about the mash, we've talked about the yeast, we combine it in fermentation, and that last factor is how that stuff ages in a barrel. So we're going to head over to our barrel wall and talk about aging.
Hold up.
All right, for our last part of the process, we talked about our grains, how we mash them down, we add our yeast, ferment it into beer, run it through the still, making ourselves some moonshine, or some white dog, and the last part of the process is going to be barrel aging. Barrel aging is going to bring about 50 to 70% of our flavor and 100% of our color, so it's a huge part of the overall flavor profile we get at the end. Lots of restrictions in barrels. We do have to be using brand new barrels every single time. They have to be made out of oak and they have to be charred on the inside. So we're going to be using a nice level 4 char. It's the highest level they have to offer in the industry, giving us nice high caramelization to really balance out the spiciness of our mash bill. A lot can happen inside of that barrel because we're not temperature controlling our warehouses. So when it's really hot and humid in the summertime, all of that whiskey inside the barrel is going to expand into the oak and pick up those really nice flavors like vanilla and caramel, a little bit of toasted notes and some fruit-forward flavors. And then when it's cold outside in the wintertime, it's going to be contracting back into the center of the barrel, really passing through that layer of char, pulling with it all of those flavors and that nice kind of caramel colored color to it. Now this is going to happen over and over again through all of those wacky season patterns that we get here in Kentucky. And when it does that, it's going to be drawing more and more flavor. Now, the stuff that we taste in the single barrel program right now is about 10 to 12 years old. So much can happen in 10 to 12 years. So now we're taking the sweetness and the spiciness from our mash bill. We're taking some of those different variables with our yeast strain, and we're adding everything that can happen in 10 to 12 years inside of a barrel. Again, huge variability. That's what's going to be happening when we head into the tasting room, which is going to be the next part of our segment. All right, we're finally here for our grand finale. We've made it to the tasting room. We've talked about how all of this stuff gets made and aged and selected, and so now we're here to kind of taste through it with you. I've got my tasting mat set up with everything that I like to have with me for a tasting. It looks like a lot of stuff, but it all has a purpose, whether you want to use it or not. So we're going to talk through each of these components and how to set up your own tasting at home to make sure that you're keeping your nose and your palate sharp, really being able to pick out those nuances in the flavor of the whiskey. So the first, and I think the most important thing to have with you in a tasting always, is going to be some nice H2O. We've got beautiful limestone filtered water out here in Shelbyville, Kentucky, but tap water will work perfectly for you. Water is really important because you have to be hydrating all the way through your tasting, and you want to take a sip between samples, kind of clear your palate out and get ready for that next sample. The next thing has kind of a similar purpose. That's going to be some coffee beans. Now, coffee beans are commonly used in crafting perfumes, colognes, and scented candles, things that can really gunk up your olfactory senses. Same thing can happen with whiskey. So we provide coffee beans to everybody participating in our tastings so that when you're nosing the whiskey, you can kind of bring yourself back to baseline and really get those nuances in the nose. Next thing, also kind of keeping with that same theme on keeping your palate sharp, is going to be some nice plain original flavored pretzels. Pretzels are a really great snack to have while you're sampling because they don't have a kind of wild flavor. There's no seasoning on them. So between samples, or I like to do it after I go all the way through all 4 of my samples, kind of bring my palate back to a neutral zone by having something bland and something salty. Sip of water, use those coffee beans, and you'll be ready to go all the way back through. The next thing on the mat is one of my favorite things to have. So this is a little cup of water with a dropper. And this is great for proofing down your whiskey. And you might wonder, why would you want to proof down your whiskey? We actually sample all of our whiskeys at 104 proof, which is how our single barrels are bottled. So there's no guessing game. Sometimes you'll taste it cask strength and then you'll bottle it at a different proof. And you kind of have to play around with that dilution. We want to cut that out of the process, so we taste at 104. But think about if one of your consumers likes drinking on the rocks. You're going to be diluting your whiskey as you're sitting with that ice cube. So adding a little bit of water gives us an idea of what that dilution is going to do for the flavor and how this is going to taste with some ice, with some water, not just neat. And the last thing on the top of the mat, a little bit of an odd item. This is a spittoon. And you might be thinking, why would you need a spittoon if you're going to enjoy all of this fabulous whiskey? I like enjoying it as well, but we do have to make sure that we're staying responsible. We can taste through a lot of barrels here sometimes, so spittoon is a great thing to have on hand just in case you need it. We give everybody that comes to a selection a really cool notebook. This is handy to take notes, write down what you taste, what you smell, so that when your barrel arrives, you have it on hand, you remember what you tasted. It's also just a great souvenir. We throw a little branded pen in there. It's a nice gift to take home after coming for a long day of sampling whiskeys. And of course, the main course is going to be our samples. We've got 4 in front of me right now. We love to use these little watch glasses on the top. Just to keep the whiskey tasting exactly like it tastes when you pour it right out of a bottle. As you let this air out, it's going to breathe just like any other spirit, and that's going to start to change the flavor. More nuances open up. I really love whiskey after it's taken a little bit of a breath. But of course, for somebody running a liquor store, if you're sampling out, you're pouring somebody a sample, they're going to be tasting it right then, and so this is going to preserve that flavor that they're going to be serving people. So that's what those are for. We've been talking a lot about variety this entire time. So variety is key. We've got different mash bills, different yeast strains. We've got those 10 different recipes displayed on the wall behind me here. We want to showcase that variety when we're sitting in the tasting room. So I always make sure that whatever we have in inventory, I'm putting at least one of each recipe out on the table. What we have at the moment, we have 2 out of our 10 recipes. So the first 2 samples on the table right now are going to be 1 mash bill, 1 yeast strain, 2 different barrels. And then we've got a different recipe right over here, different mash bill, different yeast strain, 2 different barrels. So we're getting lots of variety in every regard, really giving people an idea of what we have in stock, and again, being able to taste through and find something that works for you. As you pick up your sample, you want to make sure that you give it a good nose first, so really break down that aroma profile. I really like to nose with my mouth open. If you keep your mouth closed, you tend to get a lot of alcohol vapor coming off the top of that sample. It's going to smell pretty strong. If you open your mouth, it's going to mellow out that smell a little bit and really give you some nice, beautiful fruit, floral, caramelization notes. This one's nice and creamy, beautiful bourbon there. Next thing you want to do, give it a little swish around, kind of see those oils. Now these again are bottled at 104 proof and non-chill filtered. That non-chill filtration is really nice, keeping things viscous and really nice kind of texture and mouthfeel to that whiskey. And then of course the best part is sampling. Let it sit in your mouth, coat your palate, acclimate it. I always give it about 2 or 3 sips and really kind of break down that profile, front palate, mid palate, finish, and then see what you think about it. Some people like to use a scale of 1 through 5. Some people just like to jot down what they're tasting. Everybody has their own process, and it's really interesting to see the way that people work through that. Now, by the time we sample through all of these, we're happy with the one that we've selected. The last part of our process is customization, because we want people to know that this is your barrel. So we have a couple customized components, starting with a hang tag. Now this hang tag is going to be featured hanging around the neck of every bottle. And on it, it has the barrel code. Our barrel code breaks down the mash bill and the yeast strain that make up the whiskey in the bottle. You'll see on the code there's a letter and a number featured one right next to the other. E and B. So E and B are going to be our mash bills, E being our 21% rye, B being our 36% rye. And so if you look at the code on the hang tag, you'll see the difference in letter, and you can kind of decipher which one of those mash bills it came from. The number directly following that letter is going to be the yeast strain, 1 through 5. So the bottles we have right here are E2, that means 21% rye, yeast strain 2. Bottles we have right here are B3, that's a 36% rye, yeast strain 3. And so the more that you see these out in market, you can really start to decipher those codes and show off for your friends a little bit. The second piece of customization that we have is called a shelf talker. So these shelf talkers will have account names on them. They hang right on the shelf and they let people know who picked that barrel. Really cool piece of customization. The certificate is one of my personal favorites. It's a certificate of authenticity, so it lets folks know that this is a bullet barrel. It was selected by you and it is authentic. It'll have your barrel code on there and everything. And then the last piece is going to be what we call case cards. So the cases will come in custom single barrel cases, 12 packs of bottles. These can go on those case cards and those become the display for your store. So everything here really high quality, really nicely customized, again, to let people know that it's yours. That about wraps up our tasting. I hope you guys have learned something. I hope that you're able to come and see us sometime soon. We'll walk you through the single barrel pick process again, and it'll be a lot of fun. Cheers. All right, guys, to wrap up, thank you so much for joining me today. We appreciate the Bourbon Women even more than you know. As a female that works in the whiskey industry, it's a huge deal to me that there are organizations out there completely centered around bringing women together and talking about bourbon. So I greatly appreciate you joining us. I hope that you learned a little bit about our single barrel program, and we hope that you can come visit us here in Shelbyville sometime soon. Have a good one.
Thank you, Melissa, and we're going to bring her on very shortly. But first, I know it's making everybody crazy how many comments we're getting of what I'm drinking. Just a couple clues. It is a product of Kentucky. It is a vintage whiskey. And frankly, it's really kind of a blend. Oh, I feel bad even saying that because I might have even slipped and said I was drinking a bourbon. So just to make it more confusing for you, but we will reveal the bottle at the end of the night. Now, that being said, how about Melissa Riff? I'm telling you, see, I love these young women that you've seen tonight coming up in the ranks and taking on great production, positions and marketing positions. And it's just so warming to see that. And part of Bourbon Women, yes, we are really for the consumer-based female who enjoys whiskey, but we have so many distilleries who send their women as members to network, to mingle, to meet people in the industry. We have several writers. Our board members are very credentialed in the industry. And so we celebrate women inside or out. And that's really part of our mission. So with that being said, Melissa, are you with us? I love it. The presentation was fabulous. And I think you probably have about 80% of the people watching you that are jealous as heck about your job. How's that feel to have everybody want your job?
Oh, it's pretty good. I get a lot of comments day to day about, well, you must just love what you do. And
Exactly.
It's true, I do.
But it's hard work. I know. Just even rolling barrels, empty they're 100 pounds, full they're 500 pounds. It's not like you just pick it up, throw it over your shoulder and walk away, right?
Right, yeah.
So it's a physical job as well as truly educational and sensory job. It's a lot to keep up with. So I respect. You got my respect, sister. Let me tell you. But, I had a couple questions coming in, and tell us about the Bulleit tour experience. Like, in your opinion, what will people see when they come there and go on an experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the great thing about the video we were able to put together for you guys is it shows you about, I would say 60 to 70% of our tour. So the stops, taking the bus over to the distillery, standing in front of the grain wall, the yeast wall, the barrel wall, that's about half of it. So we're very production focused at our tour. Now, I used to give tours out at Stitzel-Weller where we weaved in a little bit more folklore and history, which is always a blast. At the new Bulleit Distillery, it's a new modern distillery. It was just opened last year to the public.
Right.
We're really focused on honing in on production, and then with that, highlighting the modern technology and really the sustainability that we've been able to implement. Being a newer, more modern distillery, we're really conscious about reducing the amount of emissions we're using, reducing waste. We're actually a zero waste to landfill production site. So that's going to be a large part of the conversation. And then the tasting that we do, I think, is one of the most special parts of our experience. It's a multi-sensory tasting experience where we utilize not just the whiskey, but curated aromas, sound, and lights in the tasting room. So it's very immersive.
I love it. And you all really are grounded on sustainability.
Yes.
And I love the innovation that you all are putting toward all of that. And I think that's the direction the industry will take, just because out of necessity more than anything. I think it's very, very important, and you've articulated it beautifully. I also have a question from Knows Your Bourbon. Is Bulleit doing any experimental with toasting barrels?
Oh, that's a fantastic question, and I appreciate the
I thought so too, yeah.
I'm always about a good pun, so I appreciate that. Yeah, great question. Bulleit, we call ourselves a frontier whiskey. We're always trying to be at the forefront of this kind of new age of whiskey that we found ourselves in. As far as innovation and experimentation, that's the kind of stuff that stays pretty under wraps until it goes to market.
Right.
Fred was just talking to me about the new Bulleit Blender Select, which is our latest innovation product to hit market.
Yeah, he loves it.
Limited retail space, fantastic. If you guys can find it out in market, absolutely give it a sip.
In fact, we have a bottle of it. Will you hand me a bottle?
Yeah, I'm drinking it now.
Yeah, and I'll
that. As far as toasting expressions and things like that, it's a little bit above my pay grade. That I like to say that's why they pay me the medium bucks. But we'll get to see that kind of stuff coming in the future.
I got to tell you, I still feel this way about Bulleit. Every time I lift a Bulleit, there is this coppery amber color. There's a very specific color to your all's whiskey.
Yeah, and that new label is one of the coolest ones I think that we've put out, kind of complementing that color.
It's really lovely. And then I hate to say I have a personal question because you all are, you're in this business every day doing single barrels, etc. In your opinion, with all you've been taught and know and taste, do you feel that the mash, the yeast, the barrel, what is your pick that makes the best single barrels? What do you really think contributes?
That's a great question. So we covered in the video how important the mash is, not only to the level of spice, which is what we're known for. So we're always going to have a certain level of spice, but the body and the mouthfeel. And you got to have a good mouthfeel to a single barrel. That's going to be, I noticed, something that everybody tries to pick out when they're making their notes. Age is also an important factor. Like I said, everything we've been tasting these days is 10 to 12 years old. It's going to be important for the flavor, but also making the sale, because consumers are really kind of interested in a good age statement these days. But me personally, I have to say I've gotten more into the yeast than anything, especially because there's so many, with 5 expressions of yeast, you can really get some nuanced differences from recipe to recipe. And I actually tuned in to the WhistlePig segment earlier talking about it. Yeah. I also think it's one of the most fascinating things as a consumer to kind of rabbit hole into, because it's just a really unique part of the whiskey making process, and it's such a nuanced flavor. You have to really be putting your mind into your tasting.
I agree. I think yeast is kind of the unsung hero, and just because it's not real sexy, I think maybe to a consumer to talk about, they always jump to the barrel. Now, I'm not negating any part of the process, but I think yeast, gets overlooked sometimes on the importance. So I was just curious, with all your knowledge, and we just came off a yeast, presentation, what you thought about that.
Yeah, I thought it was a great segment. I was happy that I kind of caught the back half of it, because, and to see so many women talking about it as well was really inspiring, because it's an interesting process. And yeah, like you said, it's really the soul of the whiskey.
Absolutely. And remind me again how long you have been doing this job.
This specific job with the single barrel program, just a year, because we launched the program last July.
Okay.
Prior to that, I was a tour guide.
Okay. And so your journey was from tour guide to the single barrel program, which makes total sense. It's on the job training. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize in our industry. To get credentials like becoming a master bourbon taster or a master blender, etc. There's no degree, technically speaking. Every single distillery manages how they want to roll with personnel and production. And so, you're usually handpicked to move on and to, continue with your production career. Now, many, many people, of course, come out with degrees in biology, microbiology, all of the chemistry. But a lot of this is on the job training. Would you agree?
I would. Yeah, it's funny you say that, because everybody who takes my tour and comes to do a pick always ends up asking me, how'd you get into this? You're relatively young, pretty well educated on the matter. And the funny thing is, I was a social worker when I came into the business. And I always tell people it's like going back to school, because you study science, which is not my forte, but I fake it pretty well. You study history, you study marketing, you study legal. And so there's every facet of it. And I think that some of the best of us are kind of those homegrown experts that start, as tour guides, and we just are fascinated by all that. And so we end up kind of absorbing a lot of it.
But I will tell you, the common denominator to me is the passion.
Absolutely.
When you're on the job training and you move up in the ranks, you just have a passion for working at the distillery. And Melissa, you certainly do. We're so tickled to get you on and talk to us about single barrel programs. Wish you luck in your career journey, and I certainly hope that maybe you'll come to next year's SIP and do another program for us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Would love to have you. Thank you. All right, gang, that's a wrap. Day 2 is finale. Okay, so tomorrow is your last opportunity. The last opportunity to soak in more content, the last opportunity to bid on that auction, and certainly the last opportunity that we have to find out, what is Peggy drinking? So Fred, should we let them in on this or?
I think we should. Just because you're not going to be here tomorrow, you're not going to be there.
I could show up if I wanted
show
to,
up.
but I think I'll just go ahead and share it.
You wanna keep this out? You want to keep holding it out?
No, I think we should share tonight.
Should share it tonight.
I
First,
hate to keep
I
people
want to
in
say
suspense.
how impressed I was with Melissa.
Oh, was she
I
wonderful?
was so impressed with her.
She's a sharp individual.
And I love one of my big takeaways from the conference so far is all the young talent.
I know, I love
that
it.
we're seeing, and it's amazing. It's fantastic.
Wonderful. And that's why I hope that you all have found the last couple of days to be just as inspiring as I have. Hearing everybody's stories, they're sharing their education and their experience, and like Fred said, watching the young girls come up the ranks, it just makes it so rewarding, to help run an organization like the Bourbon Women Association. And we want to thank, of course, our sponsors that help us do that. Minnick Media. Fred, thank you for streaming for us tonight.
Absolutely.
All the content that you've seen has been curated and developed by women and for women, but we sure couldn't have done it without you streaming it out. So thank you.
Well, speaking of streaming people along, let's see if any final guesses come in.
All
but
right.
I do. Let's see if we have any final guesses come in.
So they know it's vintage. It's a bit of a blend. It's from Kentucky. I don't know if that'll do it or not.
And I do. There was a really touching comment in here from Rhonda Stansberry. Rhonda is a new member, and she says, "This is my first experience with Bourbon Women, and it's simply awesome. I joined up as I was so excited to find such an exciting group, and she can't wait to do this in person."
Oh, me either. And, before we had kind of the second shutdown, I did a very small event in Indianapolis with our Indiana branch, just a little food pairing with BBC. And the women there, I think we had like 20 people because we were limited on how many. We usually have like 80. We were so happy to see each other. I mean, it was like they really missed this camaraderie of spending time together and sharing an occasion with their friends over a good glass of bourbon. And that's what it's worth. So, speaking of good glasses of bourbon, you want to do the reveal?
Here it is, everybody. Distilled in the 1930s, blended in 1942, a blend of straights, 4 roses. Now, this is a very important historic bottle that I broke out for one of my best friends and the godmother of my youngest son, Peggy.
I stole it, actually. Don't.
And I think she's the queen of American whiskey.
Well, thank you,
That's
Fred.
my thought.
Thank you.
But this stuff is really good whiskey. I just actually sipped this with Derek Trucks, former, one of the greatest guitars player living. And everyone who sips this thinks it's amazing. What do you think of it?
I think it's incredible. I mean, the nose alone, it's so nutty and lush, and I get a lot of brown sugar and candied dates and dark fruit, and it's just a great mouthfeel. It's not like everybody can get their hands on this, but tonight is very special. And I wanted something special to drink. So thank you for allowing that. And tomorrow you will have more special with Kerri, our president. She will be emceeing tomorrow night, which again is our grand finale. Just a reminder, the auction will be over, I think, around 10 or 10:30 tomorrow. So double check with that. But I am grateful to be with you. We are appreciative of all you do to support Bourbon Women. And I have to end it by, of course, the ceremonial cheers to you. Thanks again. See you tomorrow.